Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting of the San Bruno City Council of June the 25th, 2020. If we could have roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Here.
Councilmember Mason?
Here.
Councilmember Medina?
Here.
And Mayor Medina?
Here. And for the record, Vice Mayor Salazar is recused. However, he already started before us in that he's representing the city of San Bruno on two regional committees for us, one as the alternate and one as the main person, so we appreciate it. And then if we can do the Pledge of Allegiance, if you would all rise and join me in the pledge, I would appreciate it. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United
States of America,
and
and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. All right, at this time, we're going to move on to public comments for items that are not on the agenda. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes. And it is council policy to refer matters raised in this forum to staff for investigation and or action where appropriate. The Brown Act prohibits the council from discussing or acting upon any matter not agendized pursuant to state law. Is there anyone this evening, if you could raise your hand for the city clerk, that wishes to speak on an item not on the agenda?
I currently see no hands up.
Okay. With that said, we will then move on to public hearing. City Clerk.
Item 4A. Hold a public hearing and take the following actions to approve the Mills Park Center mixed-use development. Adopt a CEQA conformity determination as part of each of the following actions. Waive first reading and introduce an ordinance amending section 12.96.020 of Title 12, Land Use, of the San Bruno Municipal Code to change the zoning map from the Commercial C to the Planned Development P-D district with a development plan for the project based upon the findings for approval in the ordinance, including the CEQA conformity determination. Adopt a resolution approving a planned development permit an architectural review permit based upon the findings for approval in attachment 2, including the CEQA conformity determination. Adopt a resolution approving a phased vesting tentative tract subdivision map for condominium purposes with lot mergers and the vacation of Camino Plaza, a portion of San Bruno Avenue and the southern portion of White Way, realignment of Keynes Avenue, and vacation of certain easements as shown on the map, based upon the findings for approval in attachment 2, including the CEQA conformity determination. Adopt a resolution authorizing installation of loading zone spaces around the perimeter of the site, including the CEQA conformity determination, and waive first reading and introduce an ordinance approving a development agreement and affordable housing plan based upon the findings for approval in the ordinance, including the CEQA conformity determination.
Thank you. At this time, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor, members of the City Council, and the public. My name is Javon Grogan, and as the Mayor mentioned, I have the pleasure of serving as the City Manager for the City of San Bruno. I'm joined here tonight with Mark Zaffarano, our City Attorney, Darcy Smith, our Community and Economic Development Director, and Ed Schaefer, Special Legal Counsel to the City for Development Projects. The City Clerk read a number of actions, 7 actually, that are before you tonight. However, the primary thing that is before the City Council is a public hearing on the Mills Park Center development, a mixed-use commercial and housing project with 427 residential units. If approved, the proposed project will utilize development potential that was provided under San Bruno's Transit Corridors Plan, which was adopted by the City Council in February of 2013. That plan was further strengthened when nearly 70% of voters in the city supported Measure N to increase allowable heights in 2014. As we all know, the prior version of this project did not garner enough support to proceed forward last year. That vote created quite a stir locally and across the state. Did it bring development to a grinding halt in San Bruno? The answer is no. Did it have an impact on the pace of revitalization in San Bruno? Some say yes, and some say no. However, as we begin tonight's discussion, I submit to you, both the City Council and the members of the public that will comment on the project tonight, that the focus of tonight should not be litigating or rationalizing last year's vote or the components of the prior submittal. Instead, the question for tonight is if the current version of the project, which is submittal 7 to the city, is acceptable to the City Council and can garner enough affirmative votes to move forward. I know that people from across the city tonight are watching and wanting to know which path forward in San Bruno's future we will embark upon. I also know that commercial property owners and members of the development community that wish to invest in San Bruno are watching. And it has also been brought to my attention that representatives from the governor's office as well as state and federal legislators are watching tonight. All of this is simple. It's all because housing production and the changing landscape of cities is one of the greatest challenges that is before us as a society. It impacts nearly every aspect of our regional and state economy, but most importantly, it affects our residents and their enjoyment of this community that we all love. As a city council and as individuals, I know that that is what matters to you most. I've been the city manager in San Bruno for the last 2 years, and I've gotten to know each of you personally. And while you do not always agree as a decision-making body, each of you care deeply for this city and want what's best. As elected leaders for San Bruno, the decision on this project and the path of revitalization for San Bruno is before you tonight. With that, I would like to go through our schedule for tonight's discussions. We will begin by a staff presentation by Darcy Smith, our Community and Economic Development Director. That will be followed by an applicant presentation, and there are 3 people representing the applicant tonight. Sean Williams, the Vice President of the G.W. Williams Company, Justin Chu, the Director of Investment for G.W. Williams, and Jessica Music, a principal at KTGY, the architectural firm working on behalf of G.W. Williams on this project. That will be followed by questions from the City Council on the presentations. That then will be followed by public comment. Next, a closing of the public hearing, and then finally, council deliberations and direction. So now I'll turn it over to Darcy Smith, who will present the staff presentation tonight and articulate why staff is recommending approval of the project. Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members and members of the public. My name is Darcy Smith, and I'm the City of San Bruno Community and Economic Development Director, and I'll be making you the staff presentation for this public hearing tonight. First, I'll start with an objective for the item, and then I'll describe the project description and history. I'll summarize, for background, the city's land use vision and transit corridors plan. I'll provide the staff analysis of the project's compliance with the city's land use regulations and long-range planning documents. And I'll close with an overview of the development agreements and community benefits of the project. And I'll restate the requested council action for consideration tonight. As the city clerk and city manager stated, there are multiple actions before the city council tonight, and we'll step through those for your consideration. First, there is the CEQA conformity determination, which is included in the following actions, which includes the ordinance to amend the San Bruno Municipal Code to change the zoning from commercial to planned development, which I'll explain later. A resolution approving a planned development permit and architectural review permit based on findings that were provided. A resolution approving a phased vesting tentative tract map, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail. And a resolution authorizing the installation of loading zone spaces around the perimeter of the site, and an amendment was distributed to the council and posted online. And the last action is an ordinance approving a development agreement and an affordable housing plan, and 2 revisions are proposed for your consideration tonight that I'll step through later. Now I'll step into the project description and the history. This is a 5.38 acre site. It's located on the corner of San Bruno and El Camino, as shown here. And also, the main area is referred to as the Mills Park Center, but there are 2 sites that are at 601 and 611 El Camino Real on the southern parcel. This shows the project history and timeline for your reference, starting back in 2017 when the project was first submitted as a preliminary submittal, and it's changed since then. In 2019, the number of units and the number of affordable units increased, and there was a slight reduction in the commercial space. But in 2019, there was a grocery store proposed, and with the 2020 submittal of revisions, that grocery store has been eliminated and replaced with 7,947 square feet of commercial space and 427 units, and that represents an increase in 2 units. The project would demolish all of the existing structures on the site, and the development would include 2 separate buildings that range from 1 to 5 stories. This is the frontage along El Camino here, which is the taller portion at up to 5 stories. But along the rear, it steps down to 1 story in some places. And each of those buildings that you see here have ground floor commercial space fronting El Camino Real, and that again consists of 7,947 square feet. The project proposes 427 condominium dwelling units. And the submittal of revisions in March 2020 again eliminated that ground floor grocery store and added 2 units, one of which is affordable. The project includes a 2-level parking garage. You can't see it here because it's beyond the ground floor behind the facade. And then there's 1 partially subterranean parking garage level. So the project does include changes to the city streets, which you saw on the aerial. Keynes Avenue would be realigned. That would really improve the traffic circulation. And there would be a new traffic signal and pedestrian crossing added at Keynes and El Camino. That would be funded fully by the developer. Linden Avenue along the western boundary would be modified to allow parking on both sides of the street with 2-way travel lanes, and that would add 17 public parking spaces that don't exist there on the eastern side, which is a red zone now. And San Bruno Avenue would be modified to extend the eastbound right turn lane to create a deeper turn pocket on the southbound El Camino Real. There's also a number of utility upgrades on the project site and on adjacent streets. Sanitary sewer lines, storm drain lines, water lines would be improved and in some cases relocated from where it is now. All of the utilities would be undergrounded, and all of those utility and site infrastructure work would be fully funded by the developer at no cost to the city. Additional street proposals proposed, they affect White Way and Camino Plaza. Those currently serve the project site, and the parcels are being merged as part of the project. So the city is vacating its interest in these roads as the public use is no longer necessary with the redevelopment. And the city will vacate, abandon, or accept as appropriate other public street and easement rights and private property rights for the realignment of Keynes Avenue and the redevelopment of the project site. That's proposed through the map process. White Way, which is on the parcel A on the west side, would be widened. Right now it's fairly narrow at 20 feet, but it would be widened to 26 feet. It would remain a public street with public access, and it would be repaved. And again, the project developer would be required to install all new sidewalks and repave where required. Also related to the streets are loading zones. So the loading zones were reviewed by the Traffic Safety and Parking Committee at 2 meetings in May and June of last year, and they approved a motion to recommend City Council establishment of 5 loading zones on city streets. That's before you tonight is a separate resolution. And the TSPC weighed in and made recommendations, and those are shown here. Important to note that in the municipal code, the TSPC recommends the city council establishment of those loading zones, which then the city council has governance over. And this exhibit in the amended resolution, which was distributed, shows all those loading zones and the specific hours and time periods. And I want to emphasize those remain the governance of the city in the future. There were a number of public meetings. I've mentioned some of them, but I wanted to show this slide, which shows the 4 community meetings which were held spanning over 3 years on this project, starting back in April of 2017 and concluding with our last community meeting, which was held on May 18th. And there have also been 6 city meetings held. There were 2 at the Architectural Review Committee back in 2017 and 2019. There was 2 with the Traffic Safety and Parking Committee, and the Planning Commission reviewed the project in June of 2019 and adopted all resolutions recommending the City Council approve this project, which were distributed with the packet. At the last public hearing before the City Council on July 9th, 2019, the mayor made 2 motions, 1 to approve the environmental determination for the project, and 2 to approve the architectural review permit. And only 3 council members were able to vote because 2 members announced their recusal from voting on the project, given the proximity of property they own to the project site. And state law requires that all 3 council members vote in favor of the project, and both motions did not pass by a 2-to-1 vote. So to prepare for tonight's meeting to review the submittal of revisions, the city increased the community engagement efforts for this site. We established a separate outreach website, which you see here through Co-Urbanize, which the city has hosted and monitored. We've updated our city project website, which is shown on the right, which has all the latest project updates, all project documents in one location. We've published FAQs there, which were just updated this evening, right before the meeting, and we've also published any and all public comments that we've received through our email address that's dedicated to this. Also, the city manager published 4 community-wide notification updates, including articles in the city manager's e-newsletter. We also expanded the public notification radius. The state law requires 300 feet, and for this project, we expanded it to 1,000 foot. That resulted in over 1,000 notices being mailed out, both for the community meeting on May 18th and this public hearing. And we noticed over 1,000 property owners as well as occupants and interested parties. We also pushed out email notification and notification on Nextdoor and the Co-Urbanize website, and a newspaper notice was also published. So we've expanded the outreach efforts to prepare for tonight. So now I'll move on to the city land use vision, which is a higher level overview. But I thought it would be relevant as I step through the project analysis, just to provide an overview of the regulations that apply to this site and the vision. So this site is within the city's specific plan, the transit corridors plan, and that sets forth a vision. It's really a transit-oriented vision for growth, and not just around the Caltrain station, but also the bus line that runs on El Camino, which is heavily utilized. And that vision was a vibrant, pedestrian, and bicycle-oriented atmosphere. We are 7 years into the plan, and the city has only seen the construction of 83 housing units. And the council in 2018 and 2019 did approve 71 additional units, but that's still well below the build-out that you see here, which is 1,610 dwelling units. And for the other uses shown here, retail, office, and hotel build-out, again, the numbers are dramatically low compared to these build-out numbers. And those are just relevant because that's the envelope that was studied in the environmental impact report, and so the approved projects remain well below that. So the conclusion that the project traffic levels are consistent remains valid. And with the program environmental impact report, which was certified by the City Council in 2013 for the specific plan and for those build-out numbers, there are mitigation measures that are identified, and this project, through conditions of approval, is required to comply with those. So the vision for this particular area on El Camino is high-density residential, and you'll see a rendering here that's pulled directly from the transit corridor plan of future project types that you'll see here, and that's a 5-story building with ground floor commercial uses. And the plan really incentivized parcel assembly and projects to be built on larger assembled sites like you see here. Many of the sites in the transit corridor plan area are small, fairly small to build on, so this vision of parcel assembly is key. And again, the TCP was really an economic revitalization plan. It was done in the era right after the redevelopment agency was terminated and the city lost that source of funding to revitalize aging properties. And so the vision here was to revitalize those older aging sites with new housing and vibrant commercial uses to serve the community. So this shows the vision statement for the El Camino Rail Corridor. And again, it's taller and more dense mixed-use development, offices, residential, near transit. And the benefit is these new transit-oriented developments not only add character to the area, but also form an important base of new residents, workers, and economic opportunities. This shows the process that the visioning went through, and you'll see it was a real collaborative effort. They did these exercises, as you see on the right, with a bunch of sticky dots and pictures, and it's just really important to emphasize that this spike here, which you'll see outlined in red, clearly states the vision was the mixed-use housing and commercial corridor. So another thing I want to touch on is the city's role in housing. This project is critical in helping San Bruno meet what's called the regional housing needs allocation. Those are assigned by the state to each jurisdiction. And then those numbers are incorporated into the city's general plan, housing element, and that transit corridor plan, which is a specific plan. This slide shows the 8-year current planning period, and our allocation was 1,155 units. And we've only issued permits for the construction to date of 168 units, or 14.5%. We have essentially 2.5 years to go, and we have a balance of 987 units. But maybe more concerning is that we have an extremely high goal for many of the income categories, such as very low. We have a goal of 358 units, and we've produced 0. That's a really tough level to meet because it requires real deep levels of affordability. And also among the low and moderate income levels, we've only made a small dent. So why is that important? Well, if the city doesn't implement our housing element and make progress, then we could face decertification of the housing element. We could lose state grant funding. But also the state has recently passed bills, including Senate Bill 102, which allow the state to impose financial penalties of up to $600,000 for cities that don't have a compliant housing element. And the law also expanded judicial remedies that may be imposed by the court when a city is found out of substantial compliance with housing element law. So we're already gearing up to work on our next housing element, and then we'll look at this compliance record as we go through that process. State laws have also been adopted that support approval of housing and discourage denial. That's referred to as the Housing Accountability Act. And details of the proposed development and the property may affect if the project qualifies for special treatment. After last July's City Council hearing, the State Department of Housing and Community Development, which monitors and regulates the housing element compliance, they became interested in the situation here and contacted us. And if this project is denied, the state might challenge the city's failure to approve more housing given these regional housing needs allocation goals assigned to San Bruno. And this might include challenging the denial based on the Housing Accountability Act. So with that in mind, I'll step through the project analysis. As I mentioned, this is a transit-oriented development site. That land use designation was changed in 2009 with the general plan adoption. And then this project is consistent with the transit corridor specific plan, which was approved in 2013, which permits housing and commercial uses. And the project meets or exceeds all the transit corridor plan development standards. Those include measured items like property setbacks, stepbacks, as well as objective design guidelines. Also, as the city manager pointed out, this project is consistent with the city-approved ballot measure, Measure N, which was approved by the voters in 2014, and that made a change to the allowable height on this property and other properties in the transit corridor plan by increasing it by 20 feet or 2 stories. So the project complies with all of those, which is the basis for the staff recommendation for approval. The building height and massing has been a source of many questions in the past, so I want to show you this rendering that articulates the variety of building heights along Linden Avenue, the western side, as it transitions to the neighborhood. There are, again, portions of the building that are 1 stories, and many portions are below the maximum height, with the tallest heights on El Camino Real, which is a commercial corridor. There's also breaks in each building. And this rendering here, which is, again, the El Camino Real frontage, does show also attempts and success at changing the building articulation along the El Camino Real frontage to soften the appearance. And as you can see here, there's a variety of open space areas, both on the corner, there's kind of a notch out where there's a little plaza area, and then on the upper floors, there are private open space areas. So next I'll cover some topics of analysis that the city studied as part of the environmental review. So there was a very comprehensive project traffic study prepared that analyzed what traffic engineering refers to as the AM peak hour and the PM peak hour. Those are the busiest periods. And it analyzed not just the adjacent intersection like El Camino Real and San Bruno Avenue, but 14 signalized intersections near the site and 5 unsignalized intersections and freeway segments and ramps. So quite a big study area. But I wanted to just pause for a moment and highlight the changes in the submittal of revisions that was just made in March, because eliminating that grocery store made a very significant change in the project trips, which are shown here in red. So the grocery store trips are actually distributed kind of throughout the day because we all get hungry and want food. But, and grocery stores have pretty long hours. Some of them are 24 hours, but here you'll see in the AM peak hour, there's a reduction of trips from 222 to 121. The PM peak hour, more dramatic reduction from 213 to 74, because with grocery stores, more people go to them like right after work, so the PM peak's busy. But most dramatically, there was a 71% reduction in total net daily trips. Because again, about a 42,000 square foot grocery store, that's a lot of square footage, and the trips were pretty high. So I just want to highlight that that was one of the major changes in the project. This traffic study concluded that all the studied intersections, and again there were 19, would continue to operate at what is the city's acceptable level of service, which is a grade D or better, and there is the level of service E or better for intersections within the county congestion management plan, and that was during the AM and PM peak. And with that resubmittal, as I showed you on the last slide, there's a high reduction in trips, so this will result in the study intersections to be improved prior to what was reviewed last July. And most important, this resubmitted project would not result in any new significant impacts or substantial increase in the severity of previously identified impacts under that transit quarter plan EIR, which looked at a really big volume again, 1,610 units and up to 1 million square feet of office space and retail and hotels. So the community has raised some questions around the proposed Allen Elementary School project, which is being modified and growing slightly, and the conclusions of the Mills Park Center traffic study would still apply with the current proposed project at the Allen School. So what does this all mean? Well, again, it means that the environmental study that was done for this is adequate, that the environmental review will not result in any new or substantially more significant environmental effects, and therefore this project can rely on the previously certified Transit Quarters Plan EIR for the project for the purposes of CEQA. But that doesn't mean they didn't study a lot of things. This is a list of all the studies they did, which are available on the city's website. The utilities, including things like water demand and stormwater, those were thoroughly analyzed, and where applicable, conditions of approval were added. There was a very comprehensive parking study and a noise study, and a shadow study. So we had a lot of questions about the impacts on the shadows in the neighborhood. So, as I mentioned, this is a transit-oriented development project. That means that the goal here is to reduce the trips from a more suburban project. So the city, including the CCAG, requires trip reduction measures. The project incorporates a lot of them, like 477 bike parking spaces. That's more than one space for every unit. There's also showers for the commercial uses and high-speed internet, which will be partially provided with San Bruno CityNet. And if you look through the project plans, you'll also see other amenities. Usually these larger complexes have a fitness room, there's a community room, there's private open space, and that will help reduce vehicle trips. So there is parking on the site in compliance with the city's code, which the city council recently adopted higher parking standards in February that are effective now and apply to this project. The code changed to require one parking space per bedroom. So this project has a mixture of studios and 1-bedroom units and 2-bedroom units, and the project provides that as well as dedicated guest parking. And for the commercial parking, the city and developer agreed that the project should meet the highest parking standard, which is for restaurants. That's 1 space per 100 square feet of restaurant public floor area. And what that does is just allows flexibility. At this point, we do not know the future commercial use, but this allows maximum flexibility to accommodate a range of potential commercial uses which have a range of parking standards. And rather than run into an issue where a use is proposed and doesn't meet the parking requirements, this is parked at the very highest standard to be very flexible. So now I'll cover the development agreement. Parking conditions of approval. So again, the community has raised a lot of concerns about parking. So there were dedicated special parking requirements applied to this. One key thing that we've discussed in the past when you consider, for example, the new parking ordinance is that the city should prohibit the unbundling of resident parking stalls. That's where there's a separate fee to get a parking stall. And also there will be required wayfinding and parking garage signage, and the city has discretion to apply other measures to minimize potential for spillover onto the adjacent residential streets. And last, the property owner agreed that the residents of this project would be prohibited from participating in any future residential parking permit program. So now the last part of my presentation will focus on the development agreement and the community benefits, just to close. In conjunction with the processing and consideration of these applications, the city has negotiated the terms of a proposed 10-year development agreement. Development agreement is a contract that's negotiated on a voluntary basis between the property owners and the city. This provides certain rights and benefits to the property owner and certain rights and benefits to the city if the council elects to approve this project and enter into this. And again, these public benefits are on top of the standard requirements. So for this particular project, there is a $10 million cash to the general fund community benefit payment. That's in conjunction with the city approval of condominiums. This is a change from last July. It's a doubling of the former $5 million base community payment that at that point included an option for another $5 million if the developer elected to create condominiums. There's also a $100,000 cash payment to the city to fund bicycle and or pedestrian improvements in the general vicinity of the project on city streets. And as I mentioned, one affordable additional unit, that's at the moderate income level. That's one of the 2 new units that was added. Additional offered benefits that were proffered first at the July 2019 City Council meeting, but that have been refined in more detail, include $100,000 to fund parking enforcement and or implementation of a residential parking permit program, an agreement to work in good faith with San Bruno CityNet services for internet and television service for the project, the prohibition of short-term residential rentals unless allowed by city regulations, the city use of the group meeting room in Building B to be made available for city meetings and city events, and last, as I mentioned on the parking section, an agreement to exclude project residents from participating in any future residential parking permit program district that's in the neighborhood. So other original benefits that were included originally in July 2019 include a longer term for the affordable units of 55 years, other commitments in the affordable housing plan for affordable housing, a new traffic signal, as I mentioned, that would be installed entirely at the developer's expense on El Camino Real at Canes, and the modification of Linden Avenue to add public parking, and that new turn lane on San Bruno Avenue. Those are all done at the developer's expense and are mostly off-site improvements. So there are other fiscal benefits to the city that are shown here. The city gets permit fee revenue from here. There's an estimate in annual revenue to CityNet of approximately $500,000. There's a city art fund contribution of approximately $65,000. And there's other associated permit, licensing fees, and utility billing revenue and connection fees. If the property is redeveloped, it would be reassessed, which would raise the property taxes that the city receives. Property taxes are a significant source of the general fund revenue for the city. And in the development agreement, there's also a provision for sales tax point of sale designation for construction good purchases. That would be a sales tax revenue during construction. And last, while this is a voluntary item and not a city requirement through an adopted ordinance, the property owner has committed to a project labor agreement that would commit to the use of union labor. And that was negotiated privately amongst them. So I'll just step quickly through two proposed development agreement modifications, which the city and the property owner have conferred on. These are very immaterial, but we present them before you tonight as part of the action. The first would modify the method by which the new public parking spaces on Linden are provided, from a license agreement to being provided in the city right-of-way, which is what's shown on the tentative map for the project. And last, the effective date of the development agreement would be hinged upon approval of the development impact fee exemption resolution, which is a separate agenda item for the city council, and tonight's special meeting following the public hearing for consideration. So that concludes the bulk of my presentation. I'll just remind you of the action that staff is considering council requests. Again, there's multiple actions tonight for your consideration. All of the actions include the CEQA conformity determination. There are two ordinances. The first is an ordinance related to the zoning change. There's three resolutions. The resolution related to the plan development permit and architectural review permit, and the resolution related to the phased vesting tentative tract subdivision map and the loading zones. And last for consideration is an ordinance approving a development agreement and associated affordable housing plan with the modifications that we showed on slides 40 and 41. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you to Community Development Director. Darcy, appreciate your presentation. In keeping with our schedule tonight, we're going to move over to the applicant presentations. So we have three folks that I believe are going to be speaking on behalf of the applicant. And could we start bringing them in or setting them up so they can begin their presentation?
I'm bringing them in right now.
Thank you.
We're going to begin with Sean Williams, the Vice President for GW Williams.
Mr. Williams, good evening.
Good evening.
We'll go ahead and begin with you, please.
Okay, thank you. first, want to thank the city for allowing us to present this tonight. We wanted to start off by first giving everyone in the community a basic brief history of G.W. Williams Company. This company formed in 1923. This is a family business, and we've been involved with the city of San Bruno for over 75 years. We built all of the homes behind the Mills Park Shopping Center. Those were originally built to help the GIs returning from World War II. And when those homes were first built, they were between $6,000 and $7,000. Today, they're worth over $1 million each. In addition to that, though, we also, of course, we built the Mills Park Shopping Center. That's what you can see there. We also built the library. We built City Hall. We built Cappuccino and Crestmore High School. Then you can see that the lower structure here along West San Bruno Avenue, that's used to be an insurance company, but today that's AT&T. So we're excited to present this project to the city at a time when housing is so desperately needed. We've worked together with the city for the last 4 years, and we've come up with a design that we think is very attractive. It'll not only be a gateway project for the city of San Bruno, but it'll also be a gem to the community. We've been part of this community, as I mentioned earlier, for 75 years, and we plan to remain a part of this community for at least another 75 years. So with that, I'm gonna turn this over to Justin Chu.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Mr. Chu.
Actually, we're going to go straight to Jessica for this. Sorry about that. Jessica's going to go ahead and present the project as it's been revised and going to go through the X's and O's of it.
Okay.
Good evening, council members. My name is Jessica Music. I'm with the KTGY Group. We're the architects on the project. It's a pleasure to be back in front of you this evening and sharing some of the updates to the project. Thank you, Darcy, for the very thorough presentation. The development team just wanted to touch on a few additional design benefits on the project that may not have been mentioned yet. And what I would like to point out is, you know, following the transit corridor plan, the project has enhanced sidewalks and street landscapes around the perimeter of the building, in particular along El Camino Real, with additional landscape. Also following the transit corridor plan, we have 4 public plazas on the project at each of the main corners along El Camino Real. So that would be El Camino Real and San Bruno, both sides of Canes and El Camino Real, as well as Angus and El Camino Real. One of those plazas in particular, the San Bruno and El Camino Real, will likely have enhanced public art for the public and greater community to enjoy. One last thing to point out, and you'll see it as we go through the project renderings, but the transit corridor plan calls out different stepbacks and setbacks that the project needs to comply to. I'll just keep stressing that the project actually shows more than what is required by the TCP, and we can point those out along the way. So just a little bit in terms of project updates. Again, some of this will echo what Darcy has mentioned, but I feel like it's worth mentioning again. Building A, the grocery store has been removed. So that's going to be a change that we share tonight. Also, because of the removal of that grocery store, our loading area that was at the corner of San Bruno and White Way has been significantly reduced. Also, as a result of the grocery store removal, the Building A garage footprint has been reduced, and we'll show you where the reduction has occurred. It occurs below grade in the subterranean level basement, and we'll show you what that looks like. Also, in Building A, because we were able to reduce the loading zone, in the envelope of that loading zone, we were able to slide in 2 additional residential units. Darcy mentioned one of those will be affordable, one of those will be market rate. We'll show you in section where those occur. Also, the garage entries for Building A have been reduced. We now only have 1 entry entry off of El Camino Real and then one off of White Way. You'll remember when we were in front of you in July that there was stacked parking that was helping the project satisfy the parking requirements in both building A and B. The stacked parking has been removed. As Darcy mentioned, the project fully complies with the city parking ordinance that was adopted in February of this year, but we no longer need the stacked parking to meet that requirement. And then also we have adjusted our bike rooms to fully accommodate the city's required standards. So again, the project, excuse me, is 427 units. This just again covers the reduction in the commercial. Our new commercial square footage is 7,950 square feet. We're parking the commercial for the restaurant standards, the highest standards at 80 stalls at a parking ratio of 10 per thousand. And we are supplying bicycle parking for those commercial spaces that meet city code. For buildings A and B, again, 427 units and parking both building A and B per the city standards for vehicles as well as bicycles. We're going to go through a series of slides that basically shows the project as was shown in July of 2019, and then a graphic that just illustrates the updates to both the plans and elevation. So at the top of this slide is basically what we call submittal number 6, which was of May of last year. And the bottom of this slide is a current proposal. So what you see highlighted in blue was the grocery store. Anything in violet is commercial space, and then anything in the orange or peach tone is essentially residential leasing, lobby, or amenity space. So what I want to point out in the slide is that the grocery store has been removed. We do have about a small amount of commercial space still at the corner of San Bruno, but you can see the significant reduction. Building B, again, remains the same. And then you can see the reduction in that lowest level of parking from a full level to basically a half of a level along with me. So this is just a blow up of what I just described. Again, the grocery store being severely reduced to the smaller commercial space on the bottom of the screen. Again, we no longer require 2 entry points off of El Camino Real for building A. One of those originally was dedicated for the grocery and one was dedicated for the residential. That has been adjusted so that we only have 1 entry point for both commercial and residential. And again, at the bottom of the lower image, you can see how the parking garage has been reduced because the grocery has been eliminated. And then I will point out that the stacked parking has been removed from building B. We mentioned the loading zone. So at the top image, you will see the expanse of the loading zone for the previous submittal and what was really required for that grocer. It stretched along White Way for almost half of the White Way frontage for building A. The bottom image shows how that loading zone has been reduced to actually less than half of what it was previously. But within that envelope where we were able to eliminate some of the loading zone, we were able to add 2 additional residential. So that's what you see in this graphic. This is a section through building A, closest to San Bruno Avenue. And what this is meant to show is, again, the section of the building at the top and how it had incorporated the full almost 40,000 square foot grocer. When that grocer was eliminated, you can see now the size of the commercial space, and that's shown at the lower image. You can also see the reduction in the parking. So the full subterranean basement removed, as well as the level off of El Camino severely reduced. And then in terms of the building aesthetic, so this is a rendering that I think everybody has seen. It's kind of been our keynote rendering. This is from the corner of El Camino Real and San Bruno. What you're seeing in this rendering, though, is the removal of the grocery store, the reduction of that commercial space, and where we've incorporated green screens kind of down at the base when that grocery and commercial space was reduced. One thing that I'll point out with the architecture, and Darcy did touch on this, but we've really shaped our buildings around courtyards at the perimeter of El Camino Real, White Way, and Linden. This is what helps break our massing down and creates a more porous effect to the architecture. It also allows us to introduce multiple architectural characters to the project. It gives us a chance to break colors, change materials, and create a nice rhythm down El Camino Real and the perimeter. So this is a view looking at the intersection of Cames and El Camino Real. This rendering hints at two of the plazas that I talked about earlier down at the ground level, and shows some of the residential amenity space and commercial space in Building B. Anything that you see highlighted in sort of the gray brick material, those are residential lobbies. And we use that architectural language to mark those lobbies around the perimeter of the elevations, and we use them as a way to break the architectural language as well as create wayfinding for the residents and guests. So this is a view from Linden Avenue, almost standing at the corner of Linden and Angus. This is showing how we have stepped the architectural massing down towards the existing single-family residence across the Linden, as well as actually pushed the architectural massing back away from the street edge. And so that step down, as Darcy pointed out, is both 1, 2, and 3 stories, finally stepping up to 5 in the rear. The architectural massing steps away from the street edge at the upper levels by 30 to almost 70 feet in some of the larger courtyards. We've kind of over the course of the 4 years that we have been working on this project, have incorporated input from the community as well as used the TCP as a guide to really kind of shape the street edge, bringing front doors down to the sidewalk, allowing there to be patios and porches and entry gates, and to really create a nice and inviting street scene. This is another view looking down Linden Avenue with the existing residential neighborhood on the left and the proposed project on the right. Again, just wanting to emphasize how the architectural massing steps down towards the sidewalk, and the variety of eave lines and roof lines, the change in the architectural language with the porches and the patios, just the engagement of the street. Kind of beyond that 3-story roof line, you get a hint of the 5 stories beyond. And then one more view from the corner of Keynes Avenue in Linden, looking at one of the, again, focused on the street edge, the single, double, and 3-story architectural massing, and then the 5 stories kind of pushed beyond, and the courtyards that separate those two. So with that, we actually have a fly-through video, if the city is able to pull it up, that moves around both building A and B. And if we're able to pull it up, I will narrate it when it comes up.
Jessica, if you can stop your screen share, we can share the video.
Okay.
Perfect. 1 second.
So this is at the corner of San Bruno and El Camino Real. And this is a view of that commercial space. And space at the grounds level will be public space. And now we're wrapping around El Camino Avenue, still looking at building A and the architectural breaks, again, the setbacks, how the massing moves up and down. This is jumping just a little bit. So this is the corner of actually Angus coming around to Linden Avenue. This is building B. Again, this is looking at that Linden Avenue where we have the building massing stepping down to 1, 2, and 3 stories. You can get a sense of how the building steps back away from the street edge, and you can get a sense for the activation of the porches and the patios down at the sidewalk level. There's a variety of building materials, from hardy siding to stucco, just a lot of articulation and individualization of the units down at the grounds level. So now we're coming around to Keynes Avenue, looking back down Linden, kind of the opposite direction. And soon the camera will rotate to look down Keynes Avenue, and you'll see building B on the right, building A on the left. And now we're moving down White Way. So again, similar step backs from White A, along White A as along Linden. You can see the massing stepping down too in the courtyards. And just the movement in and out of the architecture. This is that reduced loading zone at the corner of San Bruno and White Way, and now coming around to San Bruno, back to El Camino Real.
Are you concluded, Ms. Music?
Yes, thank you. I think we could open it up for your comment and questions.
All right, and Mr. Chu, you're okay?
Yes, yeah, I'm fine. You can proceed. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to double check. At this time, to the public, what I'd like you to do is we're going to call on the council if they have any questions on the presentations from the applicant or from staff. At this time, if you plan to speak this evening, if you could begin to show your hands. The reason for that is I see we have close to 80 attendees, and so I want to see how many we have that plan to speak, and then we'll assess at that time the length of time per each speaker. So at this time, for those members of the public who wish to speak, please start to raise your virtual hands so that we can start to get an assessment. As we do that, I'm going to turn it to the council for questions on the presentations that we just received this evening. No questions from council on either presentation. All right, going once.
Through the chair, I would just prefer to hear public comments.
Right,
Yeah,
but
I didn't say that too.
I hear you, but we're going to follow the schedule, the guideline. So this is on the presentation. We're going to get to that. We're still allowing people to get their virtual hands up. So this would be the time to ask the questions on the presentations. People are still trying to get that done, so I don't want to rush them so we can assess. So are there any questions from the council?
Did you say did Mr. Williams say he built the library?
Good question. Mr. Williams.
Did I catch that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct, G.W. Williams.
Okay, I do have questions, but I do want to wait till after public comment. Thank you.
Okay. If it's on the presentation, we can do it now. Just like I said, we still have people trying to raise their hands so I can assess. I don't see very many, and I'm kind of surprised. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. All right. Seeing other than 12 total for this evening that wish to speak under public comment. So with that said, council has no questions on the presentation before us that we just received. And so we'll move to public comment. Again, keep it in mind that I see 12. Then I believe the 3 minutes is adequate for that, for the time. What I didn't want to do is if we had 45 as last time, and the time, and of course the Zoom method here that is a little different for us, will take us a little more time to get in and out for the speakers. So I'll turn it over to the clerk. If the clerk can go ahead and begin.
Yes,
Please.
The first is James Rua Gomez. I'm bringing you into the room now. James, I'm trying to unmute you. Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Hi, good evening, Madam Clerk, City Mayor, City Council members, hardworking city staff. I'd like to thank the G.W. Williams Corporation for that outstanding presentation and their architect. My name's James Gomez. I live at 1861 Donner Avenue here in San Bruno. I've lived in San Bruno since 1990. I'm speaking on behalf of the San Mateo Building and Construction Trade Council. Council is comprised of 24 unions, 16,000 highly skilled men and women here in our county. The G.W. Williams Company has committed to the building trades and its affiliates to hire union members to build this project. We'd like to thank the G.W. Williams Company for being a champion and a champion developer. More developers should follow this standard. They believe in the working family platform that a construction worker should earn a decent wage here in San Mateo County, have health care for them and their families, have something to retire on. Also, we fund our own education, and developers like G.W. Williams believes in this and believes in the working family platforms. By doing this, it's an investment into America. By investing into American workers, our pension contributions and healthcare contributions go right back into the system and help mitigates needs from city services and county services and government services. Our retirement money goes right back into the stock market as hard money every single month, and it gets returned back out to in investments in the stock market for housing needs as well as municipal bonds. We stand in support for this current project. It's good for San Bruno, and it's good for our community with the houses to jobs crunch that we are experiencing right now. I would like to thank you for the time this evening, and I would like to encourage any of the union members that live here in San Bruno to raise their hand and just come on and say that they support the project and would like to live close to home. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for your comments.
Next, we have Alexander Melendrez. Alexander, one moment while I bring you over.
Hello, San Bruno City Council and city staff. My name is Alex Melendrez, and I'm an organizer with the Nonprofit Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County, or HLC. We are a nonprofit that works with communities and their leaders to produce and preserve quality, affordable homes. We at HLC, whose mission is to create affordable housing, support the 427 homes, both the market rate and the affordable homes, that the Mills Park Center will provide for future San Bruno residents. Future residents who could live here, but can't speak on its behalf yet. I'm also speaking in favor as a 27-year born and raised resident of this fine city. And honestly, what can I say that hasn't been said already? I mentioned my story about living with my parents in a crowded, stressful household. I mentioned how we're in a crisis within a crisis, the housing crisis and COVID-19 playing each other. As James just said, this is a union proposal. And there were still people who needed these homes yesterday, last year, in both the affordable and the market rate housing. I could even mention our living legacy of housing segregation and how a generation like myself has been locked out of the housing market. I recommend The Color of Law. It's a good book. The denial of this project's last iteration became an example across the state to why we have a housing crisis. It put our city in a bad light. It gave us an HAA potential lawsuit. But now, all eyes are on our city to see what we do, and we have a chance to correct it and come out of this more inclusive and welcoming than before. But beyond all of that, these 427 homes will be more than just talking points. It'll be more than just stats for our regional housing needs, which we are way behind on, and more than just a building. People will live in them. They are homes. People will feel at home. I want you all to imagine a moment of comfort after a long, stressful day. Probably after this meeting. You sit with your kids, your loved ones, your pet, yourself. You relax and you feel comfort. That's what a home provides. That's what a stable home provides. And that's what we all strive for. And it's why people say housing is a human right. When we deny housing, we deny people. We can't say not in our backyard to people. We have to start looking at buildings as homes for people. And to quote somebody from the last meeting, last year, San Bruno is great, so let's make more of it. And as a 27-year born and raised resident of the city of San Bruno, I want to see this in our community. Thank you for your time and your leadership moving these needed homes forward.
Thank you for your comments, Alex.
Okay, next we have Mark Burry. Just one moment while I bring you over, Mark. Hi, Mark, can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good evening, Honorable Mayor Medina and Honorable City Council members. Thank you for your public service and allowing me to speak. Speaking on behalf of the plumbers, pipe fitters, and HVACR fitters, local union 467, and our apprenticeship training center, I'm honored to express our support for the Mills Park Center development project proposal. Our local union was chartered here in San Mateo County in 1903 and continues to proudly serve the region and represent local, hardworking, highly skilled men and women in the plumbing and pipe fitting industry for over 116 years. We're currently comprised of more than 1,400 members, including 200 apprentices, 800 journey persons, and 400 retirees. The Mills Center developer and owners are committed to building the project with local union construction industry veterans and apprentices. Hundreds of opportunities for workers to gain a pathway into the middle class through apprenticeship training will be supported by this project. On behalf of local construction workers, apprentices, and our employers, thank you, G.W. Williams Company, the Welsh Family Partnership, and the City of San Bruno for supporting employment opportunities that promote viable careers and provide family-supporting income, healthcare, retirement, and career training benefits to local residents. Benefits that will positively impact our community and help close the affordability gap. Please approve the Mills Park Center development project proposal so that local businesses and residents can begin enjoying the benefits it will provide. Thank you for considering these comments and for your continued support of the local union construction, trades, and training programs.
Thank you for your comments, Mark.
Next we have Russell Steins. Russ, I'm trying to bring you in the room.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me?
There you are, yes.
Okay, great. Says
whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I, as you, want to see us move forward and see progress here, but not at the cost of our neighborhoods or community. We owe every resident at least this. The developer held meetings in the beginning of this whole project and asked the surrounding community what he could do to move this project forward with the blessing of his neighbors. We all told him the same thing. This was way too big, way too high to be backed up on a residential community and our school. The Planning Commission made a resolution asking the developer to lower this unanimously. And again, it obviously fell on deaf ears. Instead, he has threatened this community with a lawsuit and showed us a building that is made of mind. So again, I will ask council to stand up for the people. And I ask Williams to go back to the drawing board one more time and bring us a building that still has the underground parking, so the 42,000 square feet of retail grocery could be used to take some of the units off the top and reduce the height of this. And let's face it, the height is way overwhelming. These facts remain. The Planning Commission passed a resolution asking the developer to lower the height. A CEQA complaint was filed, and I suggest that with Allen Super School on the books, a new impact and new CEQA analysis should be done. And as we all know, there is no other building of this magnitude so close to a residential neighborhood on El Camino. Also legally, council, I want you to know that you have absolutely every right not to pass this building if you do not feel that it fits into this community. I know you guys are getting threatened all the time, but the bottom line is you are put there to protect the resident. And in closing, before I hear somebody say Measure N passed by 68% one more time, I want to remind everybody that this was paid for by the developers and property owners in the transit corridor. They send out beautiful pictures of a beautiful downtown with double wide streets, bike lanes that would never fit. So if any council members are really concerned about a vote being influenced, this would be the one. So I will ask council to consider a resolution to put a repeal of Measure N on the ballot. Remember, Measure N took away the people's vote. We entrusted you to stand for us. Thank you kindly. Have a great evening.
Thank you for your comments, Russ.
Next, we have Michael. Just one moment, Michael, while I bring you in the room. Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, members of the San Bruno City Council. My name is Michael Ochoa. I'm a representative.
I can't hear him.
Michael, we lost your audio. Michael, can you hear us? He doesn't appear to be muted, Mayor, so I'm going to, for now, put him back in the room with his hand still up so that he can get that fixed.
Good idea. Thank you.
We'll go to Vaughn Gregory. Vaughn, I'm bringing you in. Hi, Vaughn, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Good evening. Can you
Whenever
hear me?
you're ready.
Okay. Dear Mayor Medina and council members and city staff, I asked this question at the May 18th, 2020 community meeting where staff was not available to adequately comment, so I ask it again and more specifically. What will be the difference in estimated property taxes for the finished Mills Park project versus the property taxes that are paid on these properties, which are under Prop 13? Because the properties have long been held by their current owners, will the property taxes be reassessed at full value, or will they remain at the pre-construction value due to Prop 13 protections for commercial properties? In other words, will the residents of San Bruno receive adequate funding for schools, libraries, parks, streets, and public works commensurate with the increase in city population that will be utilizing these services? Or will the new development benefit from these services based on pre-Prop 13 protections for their properties? Darcy touched on this in her presentation tonight. However, no estimates were given, and I asked why. She also mentioned that there would be increased sales taxes in San Bruno, but again, there was no estimate. Once again, my opinion of this project is that it's too big for the scale of the neighborhood that surrounds it. It will increase noise, traffic and congestion, create increased demand for parking, and will diminish the quality of life for nearby residents. High density housing in the time of COVID-19 needs to be reconsidered. In addition, with regard to businesses on the property, how will you assure that contracts in advance so we don't end up with another new mixed-use building, such as the Aperture Apartments, with no business tenants since it opened last year? San Bruno doesn't need any more empty storefronts. The residents of San Bruno deserve better. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you for your comments, Vaughn.
Next, we have John Marty. John, one moment while I unmute you. John, I'm having trouble getting you unmuted. Are you able to? There you are. Hi.
Oh, great. First, let me express my support for the project. I think it would be an excellent addition to our city. Last year, when it was voted down, there wasn't a particular statute that was used as a basis for that decision. My question is to the entire board, will you commit to applying only the applicable statutes in your decision, whether it's yes or no? And if not, Are you ready to name line items in our already strained city budget from which funds will be taken to pay for the inevitable lawsuit? Thank you.
Thank you, John, for your comments.
Next, we have Kelsey Baines.
Good evening. Hi. Good evening, City Council. Thank you for letting me speak. My name is Kelsey Baines. I am the Executive Director of Peninsula for Everyone. We are a grassroots organization of Peninsula neighbors for more neighbors. We advocate for more housing at all income levels, better transportation options, and protection of tenants. This housing crisis has had dire consequences for our region. We've seen a growth in super commuting, including people commuting from places as far away as Sacramento, even people flying in from Arizona and Oregon. We've seen an increase in homelessness and residents living in substandard conditions, including vehicles. And we've seen community members suffering with burdensome housing costs. So I encourage you to support this project, which would provide a lot of housing for the community, specifically in a place that has transit opportunities, and hopefully we'll have even more transit opportunities in the future if we make El Camino a real high quality bus route with a protected bus lane. And I would just encourage you, given that I know you have a lot of community pressure from a group of people who are concerned about the impacts of this development, which I think is perfectly natural when you have a proposal on the table that will create a significant change. I think it's natural for people to think about all the bad things that could happen. So think about, you know, there's going to be new cars and new people, and what are all the consequences of that. But I would also encourage you to think about the consequences of not doing it, which will mean more people pushed into homelessness and more people super commuting and more people burdened with high rents. But also think about the positive consequences of doing this. So all the new neighbors that are going to be part of our community, and all the new neighbors who are going to have stable housing and who are going to be able to help San Bruno be a place where people can thrive. And if you could imagine all those future neighbors who are going to live in this building coming to you and saying, hey, thank you so much for building this housing. I'm so glad I have a place to live, which is obviously something that, you know, you cannot get because we're not living in the future. But yeah, I would just encourage you to support this proposal. I actually think the height is really nice. I like 5-story buildings. I think it's like the perfect height for a pedestrian scale building on El Camino, which I hope someday will be a pedestrian, more pedestrian friendly place. So that's all. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you for your comments, Kelsey.
And next we have Craig Glassner. It might be Marcia too. So Marcia and Craig, I'm going to bring you in the room. Hi. Is it Craig?
Yes, it's Craig.
Okay. Hi, Craig.
Hey, I want to thank all of our city council members and our mayor, who were all, at my invite, willing to come and talk to us about this project. Whether I agree or don't agree with you guys on any particular issue, I think it really showed that you care about us. But I'm worried. I'm worried that a lot of the assumptions about this project are based on a world that no longer exists. The traffic analysis, the transportation studies, the parking issues, public transportation. The world is changing daily, and all of these studies are irrelevant now. My son lives in a building like what's proposed here behind us, and he can't wait to move out. He is truly suffering living in that kind of an apartment building under the current circumstances. Will that change? Of course it will. Will it be a year? Will it be 2 years? Will they ever find a true way to treat the disease? Or will people like me be kind of isolated for this whole time? And that's what scares me. You know, when we were looking at this project, a year ago, 2 years ago, we thought, well, we'll go to Florida to visit grandma. We'll go to Ohio to visit my aunt. We don't have that option. I can't leave my house. I can't go to the mall. I can't go to the library. I live 20 feet away from where there's going to be major excavation and major pile driving. And yet there's no escape for me while the current circumstances exist. So I think we really need to look at this with a new perspective than we had before, because it is a different world we live in now. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig, for your comments.
Next is Caroline.
Hi, thank you so much. I think that it's unfortunate that some people point to how this proposal didn't pass the first time as a real problem that everyone's looking to San Bruno for, because even though we have a housing crisis, I don't think that every project should just be rubber stamped. I think it's wise to think, does this fit into the community, and check out the logistics of it. Last time I was wary of the project mostly because as a Whole Foods shopper, and that's what they were going for, I know what the logistics are despite the traffic report. So I was kind of worried about that. Now that it's gone, and I appreciate that fact, even though I would love to walk to a grocery store in my neighborhood, I am definitely more supportive of the project. I feel like it is a very beautiful project, and if a project is going to be 5 stories in the neighborhood, it might as well be that one. Be that as it may, I think that it is still wise to think of logistic concerns. And personally, I am concerned that in the past meetings, it's been difficult to get all-encompassing information about all the development that's going on at once. The projects from Google on Cherry, as well as Allen School, as well as what may hopefully be in the works for the library. So I don't really have a question. It's more of a concern in regards to the whole process, instead of focusing on one development, seeing it in the big picture, and making sure that the transit corridor is used to its full capacity. In terms of, again, what someone had already said, I hope that the retail is full and vibrant. That being said, not everyone who's shopping retail is going to want to walk to Caltrains, let alone BART, which is farther away. Is there going to be some sort of shuttle developed to go through our Main Street, as well as that new Jewel, should it be created, as well as Tanforan? So again, I don't necessarily have a specific question, but my concern is just making sure that whatever goes forward has the flexibility to make sure that the school and the kids that are going to be there are taken care of, the people using the library, and that people who are doing shopping there do have better resources as far as going around and supporting those businesses. So thank you so much, and good luck.
Thank you for your comments, Caroline.
Next is Plymouth Ansberg. Just one moment, Plymouth, while I bring you in.
Hi, you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hi. I'll make this really brief. This project meets the transit corridor plan, and so yes, it basically should be a rubber stamp to approve it. Like, we shouldn't be quibbling around the edges of details. It meets the plan that the voters approved. They weren't duped into voting for it. And I'm kind of annoyed that we are even having to deal with this again. It's like, I don't want this to come around again, because it will. In terms of people who have concerns about COVID-19, apartment buildings and condos are not going away. People who live in them are going to adapt. I have friends who live in them. They wear masks in the elevator. They bring sanitizing wipes with them when they go in and out, and they go on with their lives. And I'm sure that if the developer wants to sell these units, they'll rent these units, they'll come up with mitigation measures involving possibly increased airflow or easy to clean fixtures. So please approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Plymouth.
Next is Daniel. Just one moment, Daniel, while I bring you in. Hi, Daniel. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sorry, you caught me in the middle of a bite of food.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. Hi, everybody.
Good evening.
Sorry, I'm still finishing it. I'd like to submit my comment in support of approving the Mills Park development. My wife and I are relatively new homeowners in the Mills Park subdivision, just up the hill from the development site. While I understand concerns that other residents have with regard to this being a large development effort, I also understand the predicament that we are all in as Californians and the urgent need to address the housing crisis. Furthermore, the current development site is an underutilized and neglected space ideal for development. In an ideal world, we would fill this space with single-family homes to match the neighborhood abutting the lot, but that is not realistic to ask of developers given California's latest laws, as well as the fundamental need for denser housing in these areas. Additional housing in this area will provide much-needed stimulus to the surrounding commercial spaces and the downtown, while providing significant tax revenue for the city. Please do not risk plunging our city into an extended lawsuit we are guaranteed to lose, and accept that we have a decent proposal in front of us, which is much better than the alternatives we will be left with. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel, for your comments.
Next is John Medina. Just one moment, Mr. Medina, while I bring you in. Hi, John, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Yeah, well, thank you. I want to thank you, Mayor Medina, and council members and staff and GW Williams and the developers for putting on a nice presentation. My name is John. I actually represent fire sprinkler fitters in the San Francisco Bay Area. Unfortunately, I'm not a resident of San Bruno, and I appreciate you letting me and the community let me speak. I do think I have some offering views as an agent that works with members that do live there. We do have plenty of members that live in that area that are very excited for this opportunity, much like I was, to work and live and work close to home. And this is definitely, with the developer's commitment, one of those possible situations where our members and our workers can do this. I respect the concerns from many of the people that live in this community. I do live in a community similar down here in Hillsdale, where there's been a large growth from the Bay Meadows project, and a lot of concerns we had as we watched it grow. But watching the revitalization of this area, the increase to home values and the feel of community for places for our kids to run around and different stores and venues for them to liven the community up, I think has been something that gets missed. We all have that fear of change and see these impacts that happen, and I get to see it on many cities from all over the Bay Area and the peninsula. But when it does hit close to home, I understand it can be a little bit scary, but I think this is being done the right way. It's being done near transit oriented. There's already large developments in the areas, and I think that the community will really get behind this and see it in the years to follow. And I hope to see this project pushed along and move forward, and so that community can enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, John.
Next is Leslie DeMichelle. Just one moment, I'm trying to get Leslie unmuted. Leslie, I'm having trouble getting you unmuted. Are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, I can't get Leslie unmuted, so I'm going to put her back in the room. But we will move on to Selena Gu.
Thank you.
Same thing, Selena. I'm trying to get you unmuted. Hi, Selena. Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you for letting me in.
No problem. Whenever you're ready.
I live very close to where this development is going to be built, and I want to ask the council members to not get bullied into saying yes. This is just too big for our small community. I mean, the developers, we had issues about the parking before, and this time around, they took away the supermarket, but they also cut back on the parking again. So what makes you think that these units are going to have only one car for each unit? There's going to be overflow, and it's going to flow into the residential areas right around it, and there's already limited parking where we have truckers parking their cars here, or we have people who are leaving their cars here as they go to the airport already. So parking is going to continue to be an issue, and that's something that has not been fixed. There's going to be the development to the school zones. I mean, how is this going to cause more traffic and cause more trouble for the school area? There's a library right across the street. Is this going to be a safe area for the children to be crossing the streets? Is it still going to be the same homey feel right now, or is it just going to be a busy crosswalk where it's nothing but money? I mean, are we going to have empty storefronts just like the Aperture home area right now? I mean, it's been a year. How are we going to be sure that that's actually going to bring in income, or is it going to be another empty storefront? I think we should delay this and get some more changes into this development. I'm grateful that they've cut back on the supermarket, but it's still too big for our community. I think we're making right steps, but I don't think it is right now is a good plan for what we have. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Lena.
Okay, we'll go back to Leslie DeMichelle. Leslie, I'm still unable to unmute you. Are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, we'll skip Leslie one more time. Just one moment. We'll bring in Jeremy Dunk. Just one moment. Hi, Jeremy. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Just want to make a couple of comments. First, just in support of the development generally. I think this is a pretty well deliberated plan. There's lots of trade-offs and consideration. This is a plan to make homes for lots of people. We have kids coming of age in this area, and we'd like them to be able to afford to live here. I would like them not to be priced out of the market. The housing needs assessment is based on projected growth. Yes, there's a specter of lawsuit if things aren't complied, but that's not actually the reason that we should do it. I think that it's good for the community to have a growth mindset, to think of where we want to be in 15 or 20 years, to have families that can afford to live here and not be priced out by tech, and to have the density that will drive more affordable, more businesses, lower commute mileage, and just put us a better footing so that we aren't looking at empty tan fran or continued lack of support for downtown businesses and so on. Yes, there's some trade-offs. It's not great, but there is no perfect plan, and I think that we should accept that this is a good plan. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Jeremy.
And last, we have Craig Glassner again, so it might be Marcia. So let's bring them in.
Well, no, it's actually Craig again. I wasn't sure if I was allowed to comment a second time or not.
Yeah,
if not,
Craig,
that's fine.
Craig, I'm sorry. I apologize. It is one person per.
Okay, that's fine. I'll send it another way. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. To the audience, is there anyone else that wishes to speak under public comment? Please put up your hand now, because after this, we're going to then move for closing the public hearing. Go ahead, City Clerk.
I see one more hand. I do want to clarify, we have one call-in listener, and for that call-in listener, if you want to speak, you would press *9 on your phone. I just want to make that clear.
Thank you, City
Clerk. And I see Matt Jones. Just one moment, Matt. Matt, I'm trying to get you unmuted.
Can you hear
us? Yes, can you hear us?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I just had a couple quick questions for the council. And overall, I guess I just wanted to say, as a person who grew up in San Bruno and a person who worked in the community development department for a couple years, that I have general support of the project. And if it's a choice between this project and no project, I think the community would benefit much more greatly with a project in that site. I guess I just had a couple other questions for the council, kind of in terms of long term. So first, I just wanted to ask, I guess, I've heard a lot of building trade union members call in and talk about how, this is going to be really important for them. The question I have there, I guess, is just on the housing side of things. I couldn't help but notice that for the regional housing needs allocation numbers, that this project looks like it would allow the city to meet most of its market rate housing, but it seems the city seems to be lagging quite far behind on extra low through moderate housing. And I'm kind of wondering, if this project happens, the next project gets proposed and it's 80% market, what's going to happen to the community? I mean, I grew up in San Bruno, which I always saw as kind of a working class community with a lot of people who had jobs at the airport. And I just would hate to see that the demographic diversity of San Bruno be threatened, and that city's character that benefits from that, from projects like this moving forward and changing some of that character of the community. The other comment I wanted to bring up is just that, I think that this is a really important time. There's been a lot, especially during COVID, talking about small businesses, and I just wanted to check in to see what the city and the developer strategy was in terms of supporting small businesses that occupied those retail spaces down below, mom and pop shops. For me, I'm a little bit, I've seen so many projects, new projects, where those spaces are occupied by corporate franchises, and I think it would make sense for the community to really strengthen some of those partnerships and tools to allow small business owners in San Bruno to have the tools to succeed in those spaces. And lastly, I just wanted to ask the council what the vision was for El Camino in terms of transportation and in terms of strengthening those connections between BART, Caltrain, and El Camino Real as they're looking at projects like this in terms of non-vehicular means of transportation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt, for your comments. Do we have it?
That's all the hands that were raised.
Okay, well, thank you very much, City Clerk. Appreciate your help. Okay, with that, this was a public hearing. We have checked. I have looked myself. With that said, can I have action to close the public hearing?
Motion to close public hearing.
Is there a second? Nobody wants to close the public hearing?
Can you?
I'll second it.
Okay. Motion made and second. This will be just by voice for closing the public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Linda, was that an aye?
Yes, that's an aye.
So that's 4-0 on voice to close public hearing. What I'd like to do, with council's permission at this time, I was trying to take notes to the best of my ability on some of the questions. Some of them had similar, close to or the same question. So I'd like to ask this of staff. After that is done, I'd like us to take a break, and then we're going to come into our question, answer, and discussion for the council. So staff, are you prepared? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. We had, we had a couple, and that was about the empty storefronts. What type of support or plan it is for the small business to make sure that they aren't vacant in, whether in the challenging times or in ordinary times.
So there are no requirements within the development agreement, and we do not have the ability to require specific tenants in the new development. It is my understanding that GW Williams has for a long time been working with the tenants at the current Mills Park Development Center in anticipation of redevelopment. If there's anything further, I would toss that question to GW Williams.
Okay. Mr.
Yeah,
Mr.
Hi. Good evening. I can take some of that real quick, just in terms of addressing the commercial tenants. We've had longstanding relationships with all of them, some spanning decades. So we really have been keeping our tenants informed of the whole plan here. And we do intend to work with them and give them plenty of ample notice. We have a 6-month notice built into their lease, so they should have ample time to secure a new location. And obviously, if there's any problems, we will take those on a case-by-case basis and address those. But that's kind of our plan moving forward right now as construction schedule gets set and such.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Q.
Can I ask, just since we're on the same question, so I don't go back to it later?
Hold on. Yes, Councilmember Mason.
Is there any work being done between the families? Because I don't know what else Williams owns. I'm aware Welch owns some other properties. Is there any effort being placed to actually place these commercial, commercial storefronts in other locations, maybe owned by the Welch family or owned by owners in downtown?
Mr. Chu?
To my knowledge, we don't have any other dealings with the Welch outside of the property that we need to assemble with this. We haven't talked about anything else at this point, as far as I know. If Sean has any other information, feel free to jump in, Sean, but I don't think there's any other thing going on.
Mr. Williams?
Right, thanks, Justin. Yeah, we don't have any other dealings with the Welch family other than this assemblage.
What about, just on the same line of questioning through the mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Mason.
Is that a possibility that should this be approved tonight, that you could work more closely with your tenants to identify what's vacant and then actually try to match them, or at least say this is what's vacant and these are the rates? I just think it's really overwhelming. I've been to some of the restaurants. You have an immigrant population that owns some of those restaurants, some monolingual speakers of other languages, and I think it would be helpful to provide that connection if possible. I know it's not required, but is that something that the Williams family would be interested in or would look towards?
Mr. Chu?
I think it would be. I think it kind of goes to what I mentioned about just taking a look at some of the situations, and hopefully they would approach us and ask us, and we're obviously very open again with the longstanding relationships to help those that are in need and try to help them with their situation. So it is something we're open to, of course. So please, if you hear anybody, they can definitely reach out to us.
Council, allow me to ask the questions that the community has. Like I said, we will have our opportunities. If there's something you want to tag on to this, let's do it when it becomes our time, just so in case the public wishes to hear their answer and depart, they can do so. We had about, I'm going to couple these a little bit, shuttle development, a vision for El Camino and transportation, which is kind of non-vehicle. Anything on that, staff?
Sure. So this came up a little bit last year. There are existing 2 shuttle services that actually pass by the site right now at the corner of San Bruno Avenue and El Camino Real. One is a Caltrain study at Caltrans shuttle, and the other is from Samtrans. You can go to commute.org. They pass at both AM and peak hours. One goes to the BART station and Caltrain. The other goes straight to Caltrain only.
Okay. There was also, Selena, was about parking concerns, safety for the pedestrian as far as their safety and walking around and to the library and other things, and just the parking in general, still potentially not enough.
Sure. So there were a number of questions on parking. If memory serves me correctly, it was mentioned that parking was reduced with the revised plan. That is true. The actual number of parking spaces were reduced, but it was commensurate with the reduction of the grocery store. The parking that remains still meets the city's code. It is not one per unit, it is one per bedroom. And all of the commercial spaces are parked at the higher end of the city's parking code for restaurants. Now, there may be another retail use that goes in and has a lower parking count threshold, but the proposal is to provide parking sufficient for a restaurant, which typically has the highest parking load per the city standard. In regard to the city's vision or the council's vision for downtown and the transit corridor, I think that is most appropriately articulated by the city's transit corridors plan that calls for revitalization along downtown, El Camino Real, and near both the Barton Transit Station for higher density development, not just residential, but also commercial and retail. And so the city very much has a plan for that. And this project is one of, I believe this will be the third or fourth project to take advantage of the additional density provided through the transit corridors plan.
Okay. And I think one of the questions was about pedestrian safety, the youth, the library, and all of that around that project.
I'll turn that to Darcy Smith.
So Darcy Smith, Community and Economic Development Director. So as I mentioned in my presentation, the project will include changes to the sidewalks on all frontages of the project, and that those sidewalk improvements are fully paid for by the property owner. But just to highlight some of them, and is that the city requires through the transit corridor plan wider sidewalks. So along El Camino Real, for example, the sidewalks will be 12 feet. If you've been to the project site recently, walked it, the sidewalks there are fairly narrow, but they would be widened to 12 feet. And as I showed on the presentation, and as Ms. Musick showed, there would be wider plazas, and that would improve pedestrian safety just by the width. It would allow not just more people to walk on the sidewalk, but a variety of people, including people with disabilities and in sidewalks. In wheelchairs. But and then where the project site touches a crosswalk, for example, so crossing to the library, for example, from the project frontage, those crosswalks would be restriped and improved with new curb ramps. So in the city, we have a number of aging curb ramps, for example, and so that is challenging for a variety of our population members. And those curb ramps would be brought up to current ADA standards. And restriped to provide better pedestrian safety. But I'll also point out that the development agreement would require a $100,000 direct payment to the city to fund bicycle and or pedestrian improvements to city streets in the general vicinity of the project. So the city council in the future, if that payment is made, would have discretion to fund other off-site improvements in the vicinity. And there was a question about Safe Routes to School posed earlier, and that's a program that the city is working on. And we were just awarded a grant of almost $250,000. And this project, being it a private development project, does not have to comply with the Safe Routes to School program. That's a program that relies on the school district and the city as implementers to identify operational and infrastructure improvements or systems that will help reduce the barriers and promote walking and biking to school, hence the name Safe Routes to School. But with that $250,000 grant, which will be coming to the city council, the city's public works department will start work on that. But again, the city could play a role in funding improvements that might be needed to improve those Safe Routes to School.
Okay, thank you. There was a question in regards to the property tax of a new project. You know, the new property tax versus Prop 13, and will it be reassessed? And more specifically as well, the sales tax that is commented to come in, but wasn't quantified, or an estimate, I should say.
Sure. Javon Grogan, let me take that, Mr. Mayor. So with regard to the property tax, yes, the property will be reassessed because it is the exact same property owner that does not keep the Prop 13 values. So post-construction, the property will be reassessed. In regard to estimated property tax value, we are estimating for the city approximately $300,000, actually a little over $300,000 in additional annual property tax from the building per year. However, it's worth noting that the city of San Bruno actually receives one of the smallest shares of property tax. The council may remember the sort of breakdown dollar chart that we provide every year. For example, the San Bruno Park School District receives almost double the amount of property tax that we receive, so they could expect to enjoy $600,000. And the San Mateo Union High School District receives a little bit more than the city as well. And when you take a look at all of these school agencies, both the San Bruno Park, San Mateo Union High School District, and the San Mateo Junior College District, they are set to receive over $1 million a year in additional annual property tax. As well as there's the County of San Mateo that receives almost double what the city of San Bruno receives via property tax. We receive approximately 15 cents per dollar, and the county receives 26 cents per dollar. So they will be over $500,000, approaching $600,000 in additional annual property tax. With regard to sales tax, that information has not been quantified because we do not know the tenants for the commercial space. There was a projection provided last year with the grocery store because we knew that it would be a grocery store, and there's market information on how much sales tax a grocery store generates. However, for the new development, there could be a variety of tenants, and so those projections are not known at this time.
Thank you. There was a comment about a CEQA complaint, and again, I think more of a particular statement of the size of being El Camino near a neighborhood. But anything on the CEQA or that was talked about that you're aware of?
There was a member of the public who stated there was a CEQA challenge filed for this, and there has been no such CEQA challenge filed. And there was also a question around CEQA and the Allen School, and as I stated in my presentation, the CEQA conclusion would not change with the Allen School project from a traffic perspective. And the Allen School project does their own CEQA analysis. They actually just initiated that. The property was determined to be historic. So as I understand it, they're still working through that process through CEQA. But it would not change the findings of the CEQA analysis.
Okay. Then there was, I think, a question/statement as far as the project that didn't move forward last time on the basis, as well as is the city or the council applying current statutes to the decision and funds to pay for any potential litigation?
I think that question was directed to the city council. My recollection is that the question was asking if the council denies it, will they, upon what grounds would they use, and would the city council identify funds to fund the lawsuit? So staff has no response at this time.
Okay. The other one, I'll try to couple it, but we had one as far as just things have changed. It's different with COVID as far as the traffic, the transportation. Studies aren't relevant as they were because of what we're going through, and then maybe it needed a new look and perspective. Another was just about the bigger vision and the process for the YouTube or Alan and how we're looking at that. And of course, Matt, who I'll couple this together, was just about the housing and that we're we're behind in the extra low housing as was alluded to in the presentation. So maybe you can put that all together.
There are many parts of that question, so I'll do part and then I'll toss it to Darcy to pick up whatever I leave off. With regard to multi-unit housing, absolutely COVID-19 and the pandemic is having a significant impact on all parts of our society, but there's no indication that multi-unit housing is going away. In fact, most of the developers that we are talking to are still interested in a pipeline for development. And wanting to have projects entitled in the city of San Bruno and the Peninsula region. That is largely because of the significant office development that has occurred in the Peninsula over the last 25 to 30 years without a commensurate development of housing. And so certainly there is a capacity within the city of San Bruno for these 427 units, as well as additional capacity in what the numbers that Darcy presented with our RHNA, our regional housing needs allocation numbers, that are actually expected to go up and go up fairly significantly with the new RHNA numbers that will be due out next year. And so multi-unit housing is still being planned, and I believe that's emblematic of the Williams Company continuing to, with this project and wanting to invest in the city of San Bruno and build these 427 units. With regard to the other part of the question was?
Oh, you're muted.
Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
Didn't want to interrupt. I apologize. I think the other thing was just looking at the big perspective, right? Alan, YouTube, what the whole process, also just about how low our extra low housing, which we do know that from the housing, from the report. So I think it was how are we coupling all that together?
Perfect. I'll toss that to Darcy.
Yeah. So how are we coupling that all together? Well, when the city does the long-range planning document, like a specific plan, we do build upon the general plan and look at the general plan as the master blueprint document. So usually the specific plans fall under the general plan, and in some cases, such as the TCP and potentially with the Bay Hill specific plan, the general plan is amended to reflect that. But they are coordinated, and the CEQA analysis of the last document to be prepared is coordinated and looks backwards. So the Bay Hill specific plan will incorporate the build-out numbers in the transit corridor plan and the build-out numbers in the general plan and their analysis. So they're all sort of sequenced, if you will. But I'll emphasize that the Bay Hill specific plan is more geared around the expansion of an office park, and it's not looking at a significant amount of housing over there, in part because of its location to the freeway and the fact that the property owners intend to or wish to redevelop those properties with office uses and intensification. And then there was another question about the RHNA numbers and the very low. That's just a really tough income level to hit. And I want to emphasize that there have been other developers who have provided zero on-site affordable housing. So, for example, the Aperture had 0 units. They were a rental project, and the city's code did not require rental projects to provide on-site affordable housing at that time. Up at the community college site, the Summerhill homes that are being built, or the D.R. Horton homes, those have 0 affordable units. They paid an in-lieu fee. We have built up our in-lieu fee fund to almost $4 million, but the optimal provision is on-site units, as you've seen here. And the GW Williams Company has proffered up deeper levels of affordability, which I described in the staff report, and an additional 10-year term on the affordable units. And again, those items were negotiated as community benefits in the development agreement.
And just to piggyback on that, as a city, our best opportunity to incentivize affordable housing is to actually approve development. So the city of San Bruno has a 15% affordability ordinance for new development, and similar to this project, we prefer on-site. And with commercial development, there's what's called a commercial linkage fee, which provides funds that goes into our affordable housing trust fund. As Darcy mentioned, our affordable housing trust fund right now has a balance just over $4 million, but with the average price to construct a unit at $4 million, at $1 million, that money doesn't go far at all. And so approving development is really our best avenue to incentivize affordable housing. Even though we do have some parcels, most affordable housing developments now, especially in the peninsula, due to the cost of construction, require land plus significant local contributions as well as state and federal grant funds. And so proceeding with the transit corridors plan and other development opportunities is our best path forward.
Okay. Thank you for responding to those. And of course, council may have additions or follow up with more clarifications and additional questions on those. I would like to, before we move on to council questions, which will be brought, I'd like us to take a break so that we can take care of anything that needs to be taken care of. And then we'll get into our dialogue, questions, and comments, and then we'll see how it goes. Let's shoot
Mr.
for
Mayor?
That's okay. Yes, Councilmember Medina.
Yeah, just one question that didn't get
oh, please,
answered from the public was the issue of and concern about the parking, and probably that answer there is the agreement to not allow the residents from this development to park in the neighborhood, and with the parking program, a residential parking permit program. Maybe staff could kind of be a little more eloquent talking about that.
You did fine.
Yeah, so that's correct. But also, in addition to that condition of, or that requirement, there are other provisions in the conditions of approval that regulate and address different measures to reduce spillover parking. Like I mentioned, the fact that the developer or future property owner cannot charge separately for parking. Sometimes in projects like an apartment building, it might be an extra $100 a space or $200 a space. And that for some people can be a barrier and cause them to park on the street. And so that this project is prohibited from doing that through a condition of approval that runs permanently with the land. And other things like wayfinding signage, for example, that can help reduce spillover parking.
Okay, thanks, Marty. Okay, so we're going to go ahead. Let's take a goal of 10 minutes. And council, if we could not log out of the Zoom meeting, and we'll take a recess for about 10 minutes, please.
One moment, I'm still waiting to hear from her.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are ready.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and call back into session the special city council meeting of June the 25th. We have gone through the presentations from staff and the applicant. We've taken public comment. Public comment was closed. Some of those questions were answered. And now we're going to bring it to city council for your questions, comments, etc. So I'll look for the hands going up and virtually. I know there's not seeing anyone. Thank you, Councilman Marty Medina.
Right. Thank you, Mayor Medina. Two questions were brought up. That one was directed to council regarding a denial. Another public comment or question was about the right of denial. And I wanted to make a comment on that first and then turn it over to staff, being that we could deny, but there's risk on everything. And denying because we have a right to means that you're likely going to get sued. This project is located in an area that the voters allowed 5 stories. That is a right of that property, and I'm not going to rehash everything that we talked about last time, but it's hard to say they can't do something when they're legally allowed to. So I wanted to ask staff, the need for housing is strong, and it's understandable that we need to do our part. The legal risk is even stronger, and I was hoping that staff did touch on that the state could impose some penalties from SB 102 for $600,000, right? What else could the state do in the legal end of things that shows how much pressure there is currently in from the state? And it's almost taking away a council's ability, like in SB 35, to actually deny anything. It's bypass. So I think it'd be beneficial. I have some of that knowledge, but I think it's important for the public to hear what the depth of the pressure and the legal consequences that we would be facing. That's my first comment and question, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Medina, as well as SB 50 that keeps coming forward from Senator Wiener, gets kind of postponed and then comes back. Same principle of what it takes away from local entities. Would that be City Attorney?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, and Councilmember Medina, thank you for your question. I think the best way to answer that question is to say that when you have a project that meets all of the city's standards, courts will scrutinize any denial of the project. And I think we've seen that in a number of court decisions over the years. Judges are humans, they want to do the right thing. And if they see that City Council does not have any evidence in the record to support a finding of denial of a project, then it's possible, if not likely, that a court might overturn that decision and order the City Council to rehear the matter or to take other steps. And those kinds of decisions also expose the city to potential financial liability from lawsuits that might be brought by the property owner for takings of property, for a delay in the approvals, and so on. And so, without getting too much into those details, I think you can imagine what those lawsuits would result in when in situations where there is not evidence in the record to support all of the legal findings. And that's really what the court looks at. What are the findings that you have to make? And the staff has laid those out in your packet, a very extensive packet. And is there substantial evidence in the record to support those findings? And if the answer is no, then as a city council and as staff defending the city, we have to point to evidence in the record that supports a denial of those findings. And so I think that's a short answer to the general question about what is the risk of litigation in general, not just on this project, but sort of overall. And as I say, if you have a project that meets all the requirements, those are difficult matters for cities to defend. As for the HAA and what can the state do, let me throw that to Darcy for just a quick answer on that.
Yes, hi, good evening again, Mr. Mayor, council members. Darcy Smith, Community and Economic Development Director. So, as you pointed out, there is the recently passed Senate Bill 102 that allows the state to impose financial penalties if the court finds that a city or county violates state law for the targets for the housing levels. There are compliance periods before those fines kick in, but worst case, the court could take over a local government's authority over its housing plans. The other financial issue would be grants. So on Tuesday night, you approved an authorization to submit for the LEAP grant, which is actually administered by the same State Department of Community and Housing Development that called us last week and submitted a letter after the July 9th public hearing on this. So far, they seem willing to give us the grant funding for the zoning code update and housing element work that we're commencing. But if the Community and Housing Development Department is at battle with a local city, then I believe that our grant funds would be at risk. And right now that's $310,000. We haven't seen a dime of that, so it could just potentially be suspended if our housing element compliance is in question. And then I think the other challenge is that as we embark on the housing element, which you just funded in the budget, the $100,000 in the budget to initiate these issues of the city's role in approving housing becomes more challenging, and the process and sort of time and money that you're going to spend on the next housing element preparation you'll probably see that number grow substantially as we see more groups providing comment letters to the city and challenging our process. And as the city manager pointed out, the Bay Area Association of Governments recently settled on a regional number that's quite high. It's almost, I think, 500,000 housing units. And the next process will be that the counties and then the individual cities and jurisdictions are assigned their regional housing need allocation. And I've been prepped that our number, which last year again was last housing cycle was over 1,000, might grow on the magnitude of 2 to 3. So we need to be prepared. I think we've been prepped to plan for that. And in a city like this, it's going to be tough to find the sites to rezone for those housing sites. And that will also then cost the city more money to go through the zoning process and undertake that process to develop the housing element.
Yes. So Javon Grogan, City Manager, I'll take another piece of that question, which is about state legislation. In SB 50, Senate Bill SB 50 that did not pass last year was mentioned. I will say that after the July 9th meeting in 2019, the city did attend a number of conferences and have an audience on two occasions with Senator Scott Wiener. And as was reported in the media, the fact that this project did not pass last year was held up as one of the reasons why it is hard to have housing passed in the state of California. And so we do face that risk. SB 50 is not going away, nor are the other bills to essentially reduce local discretion on housing approval. And so we are paying close attention to that. But that is always a risk that there will be additional state legislation that will reduce not only this city council's ability, but other city council's ability to approve housing. Sort of connected, one of the arguments against SB 50, and this city did issue a opposition letter to SB 50. One of the things that we said is that even if state legislation is passed, cities that go through intense community engagement processes and develop plans for development of additional housing should be exempted. That was one of our core arguments for why, if SB 50 did pass, we thought we should be exempted because we did go through a transit corridors plan that not only culminated with a vote of the community that 68% of the community said yes to, but it also had an intensive amount of community engagement with the question of, we have to build more housing, where will we build more housing? And the city council, through that adoption and through Measure N, the community said in the transit corridors plan. And so because this project is within the transit corridors plan, that does pose a challenge to one of our core oppositions to SB 50.
And if I made one last comment to sum it up, Mr. Mayor, the one thing we can be certain about with litigation is that it's expensive. And most of the times litigation removes development decisions from city councils and puts it in the hands of judges. And so that's one reason why a city should carefully consider these sorts of projects which do meet all of the requirements that are specified.
Okay. Thank you. And I know Councilmember Medina had another question. And before we go, Mr. Williams, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you if you could just turn off your camera since we're back to the council. You're going to be kept up there in case we do have questions of you or your team. Thank you. Councilmember Medina?
Sorry, that was my question for now, and then I give everybody a chance.
Okay, Councilmember Davis. You're muted. Oh, there you go. You're good. We're not here.
Councilmember Davis, we can't hear you, but you're not on mute.
There you go. So the problem I have is I have a contractor at my house building a fence, AKA husband, and he's sawing. So I hope you don't get, so I'm trying to like get rid of that noise, and it's impossible. Anyway, so thank you so much to everybody who spoke tonight. I think that we have been talking about this project for a very long time, and I have talked about this project to many, many residents in San Bruno, and it's surprisingly, you hear both the positive and the negative. And I think that some of the comments raised tonight are the concerns we continue to hear, and we've heard a number of times. I first want to start out with saying thank you to staff for really putting together a robust communication on this project. And I think that we've learned a lot on what we didn't do in the past and what we can do better. And we did a great job. The website that you had, the communication that's on there, kudos to staff for doing that. There are some comments that were raised tonight, and I kind of want to address some of the things as well. Number one being safety. As Darcy mentioned in her presentation, there are a number of changes that have been made to improve the safety of that area. In fact, I can't think of one issue that's come up that actually increases the concern for safety. Just changing the Linden curve street is a huge, huge change. Adding a signal to the intersection at Linden and El Camino Real, I think, is by far a huge improvement to that neighborhood. As she talked about, widening sidewalks and actually making them wheelchair accessible without bumps and other things that actually create a very dangerous situation. The right turn lane going down San Bruno Avenue, if you're going east to make a right turn onto El Camino, a dedicated turn lane, because I have many times have come out from Mills Park Development and try to jump onto El Camino or San Bruno Avenue in a very kind of dangerous situation. So I think that's another huge improvement. Some comments were made about the Aperture property and the fact that that commercial space now sits vacant. And I think that that's not in reflection of what the city did, but about what council did to support the residents in the neighborhood. I think the developer thought that they can push through a restaurant, and for a few years was sold on building a restaurant there, but the development had no commercial parking. And so when it came to council as an appeal, we did the right thing in denying that. We're going to add an additional 100 cars to that neighborhood that doesn't exist. So I think that particular commercial property struggles because there were no good plans in the beginning to have that place set up with specialty stores, which was the agreement in the beginning. Again, thank you for the public notification. Oh geez, hold on. The location of this property can't be better situated. And I remember sitting in many public meetings that were at the senior center talking about the vision and what we wanted to see in the downtown area. And that process happened many years ago. And all development needs to happen many years prior. It's the development or the feedback on denying a project cannot happen at the 12th hour. It is really years in advance. And the community spoke, and we talk a lot about what we wanted to see. And what we realized is that properties that are in San Bruno are very small in scale. And in order to change our properties that exist today, which as we see, they're aging, they're deteriorating, they're unsightly, nobody wants to move into them, is never going to change until we can increase height limit and make a property and a location affordable to build higher. And that was a common theme discussed at those meetings. And so raising it to five stories again was approved, and that process again was many years ago. Now, can residents come back to council, come back to the city to talk about changing things going forward? Well, you want to change something, but then as we just heard tonight, that you have new RHNA numbers coming in, and we can expect 2,000 to 3,000 more units. And we can't even meet the requirements of close to 1,600. To be less than 100 units approved since that came out is really a very sad situation. Housing, there is a housing crisis, and as it was mentioned tonight, the housing shortage causes homelessness, causes people to struggle, causes multiple families living in one property, causes the parking issues. Just recently, family member was looking to rent a place in San Bruno, $3,000 rent for a small place. So can you imagine how much it really you have to put in? I mean, when more than 50% of your total income goes towards your housing, we're in serious trouble. So housing is definitely a concern, as much as the concerns of the height of the building. We've been built, and you have to build and train the corridor. So let's talk about what it would take to get to the BART train station. It's a 15-minute walk from San Bruno Avenue, the Mills Park development, to the BART station. It's probably a 5-minute walk down to the Caltrain station. It's a 30-second walk to the bus stop on El Camino Real. We can't actually have a better place and a better location for this development. It's walkable distance to downtown San Mateo Avenue, which many businesses are struggling. We'd love to see all those businesses with restaurants and different types of stores there full and be able to keep these businesses afloat. Running a small business in San Bruno is really important. And I appreciate the comments to even GW Williams and talking about the current tenants there that have been there for many years and have been given short-term leases for many years. And so they go month to month not knowing what their business is going to be next month. And I know that this development worries them as well. So I hope with changes in COVID and whatnot that we find developments for them and they can actually find a place locally in San Bruno to continue to provide those services like the hair salon, et cetera, and some delicious restaurants. So if I was a resident and I'm sitting there and I live in the neighborhood, really I think the top two concerns are, number one is really parking. And I think that our council has done a fantastic job trying to support those concerns in the community. Before I came onto the council, we changed the requirements. So you now require 1 parking stall per unit. We worked with the developer and came to an agreement that they would not be part of a parking permit program. Should a resident move into this location, they should know that. And by the way, I want to make sure it gets made very clear the residents moving in. So for GW Williams, please, 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 new residents moving in this development need to understand the concerns of a parking permit program, which means if you plan on moving in with 2 cars in a 1-bedroom place, you only have vehicle parking for 1 vehicle. That parking on the street will not be available to you, and it could be 6 months, could be a year, could be 2 years, but eventually will not be available to you. And so I think parking is a big concern. I remember going back years ago, and I mentioned this before, and I'll mention it again because I think it's important to be heard and said. I live in a neighborhood where we knew over 1,000 units are going to be developed just in a stone throw from the house that I grew up in. And that was concerning. That was overwhelming for us. And some of the same concerns, in fact, I reminisce with my aunt, my mom, some cousins who are a little bit older than me that remembers a lot about that and the discussions that happened. And it was a lot of big worries and complaints. And the development I'm talking about is Shelter Creek. And the one thing I'll say about Shelter Creek is, in living very close to that, I'm never bothered by traffic. Getting on to Genevieve is a traffic place, but once I get out there, I'm fine. And the traffic on Genevieve is really between 7:45 in the morning to 8:05, a very short amount of time with traffic. But I leave many different times and head down 280, and I drive by Shelter Creek many times. The issue that Shelter Creek has is parking. And the residents are able to park throughout the neighborhood. We see them on my street, we see them on Genevieve, we see them all over the place. And so Shelter Creek truly has a problem with their parking. And they haven't provided enough parking for there. But they're not protected with a parking permit program that the residents can now put into. But the problem with Shelter Creek is they're surrounded by development. So you've got Shelter Creek and you've got a row of residential, multi-residential homes. So we don't know if it's Shelter Creek parking on the streets or we don't know if it's those other units. And it's a vast row of multi-unit developments. The other complaint is and so that is addressing really parking and really traffic concerns. And I think adding the signal to El Camino and Linden is really a really big improvement to that area. And I would say for height concern, it goes back to how are we going to ever achieve 2,000 and 3,000 new units if we don't increase the height? How are developers ever going to be able to come out here and build something so beautiful that is really an asset to the neighborhood? I'm tired of driving by that area of town and to continue to see the going out of business. something moves in and then they move out, and broken windows on part of the Welch properties. It's really been unsightly, and there's not a single person that you talk to that you show them photos or you show them what's coming, and that we can be proud of that. There's a development that I'm also thinking about up near Skyline College, the Marisol development, and of course residents complain. I can remember listening to those meetings, and yet I know people live in the neighborhood and they love it. It's a beautiful neighborhood that's come back. The Carl Sandburg property, another big development that we got a lot of residential feedback and resident complaints, and again, something that has been really beautiful and has been a positive thing for the neighborhood. I think one of the speakers tonight mentioned San Mateo, and I, for one, know all about the development coming into San Bruno, and every time I see a new development coming in, I go, oh my God, how are they gonna do with that? How are they gonna deal with that? And all I can say is it's been beautiful. It's nice to venture down into there. It's nice to go to some of the businesses that are there, and that it has been brought back a very nice asset to the community. So although change is hard, sometimes when we get past the fear of what's coming, the change is always very nice. I think the other big concern that residents have are construction concerns, right? This development's gonna come in, and I'm gonna be living 24/7 in construction. Ask anybody that lives up in the Crestmore neighborhood who'll say that. And so I know that staff will work with the developers should the development get approved to really make sure we address parking construction concerns, noises, times, who you report to, and making sure there's a good relationship with the developer on site and staff. And we've got to make sure that we stay on top of that as well. You know, I want to end it with my last comment, and that is there was a resident tonight who spoke, and he really touched me. And when he talked about, you know, the housing as a human right, you know, we have to say yes to homes and allow so many that are struggling to find a home and to be at peace. And that's part of our job. That's part of our right. We need to make a difference, as much as and more difficult as this is for those who are closely affected by it. We have a right to be able to leave our neighborhood and our city better than it was, and to continue to develop it and make it a beautiful place. It's our right. And you know, we grew up in a neighborhood that has been the same way for so long, and so this change is hard. But there's not a city that I go down the peninsula and look at development that's come in, and there are developments. There's huge developments in San Mateo that butt up right against residential neighborhoods, and they've been there for many, many years. And I know that this will become part of the normal, and it'll become something that we can be proud of and provide additional housing and continue to. There are many areas in San Bruno that are the wrong place for it. You know, if you are living 5 miles up the hill, it's tough to get there with your groceries and to walk back up if you're trying to use transit at Caltrans or BART or bus. So this location again is just an excellent location. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a quick question before turning it over to Council Members Mason or Medina. On the Linden, I mean, currently there's parking on one side, and of course it's red zoned on the other by the old Ford auto dealer. Is that still? It had an email, so I just want to make sure I didn't forget to ask this question. Is there still parking allowed on the Linden side as it currently exists today?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So in the revised plan, there calls for a widening of Linden and also the dedication of 17 new parking stalls on Linden, 9 of which can be reserved by the city for parking for the library. So that parking that we currently have for the library will be maintained with the addition of a widened street and 17 parking spaces in total.
And so the current library parking that exists today, we will have equal to those stalls again?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Just wanted to make sure. The second part was mine, but I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to ask that. Other questions or comments from colleagues?
I'll go.
Yep. Oh, thanks. Councilmember Mason.
Okay,
sorry, the virtual thing. Sorry.
No, you're okay. I did want to ask, one of San Bruno's biggest financial, areas that we are really struggling in is infrastructure. So I was hoping that maybe Director Smith can give a little bit of background on the expectations of the developer for infrastructure in the entire property. And, you know, what, I guess, would that be a cost savings to the city doing this development, because it's so huge?
Yeah, so I'll answer that. I mean, the question of, is it a cost savings to the city? I mean, it really just depends, because, for example, does the city go in and install new sidewalks on a project site? Not always. We do sometimes do, for example, curb ramps, especially if they don't meet ADA standards. We'll fund that. And we might also fund other crosswalk improvements, such as the ones that were just installed on San Bruno Avenue with the rapid flashing beacons.
Mm-hmm.
The city may, time to time, fund, for example, a new signalized intersection, and that can be almost $1 million. And here the developers installing the new intersection at Keynes and El Camino 100% at their expense. So those are examples of roadway improvements, and widening the sidewalk is very expensive. I mean, the concrete is very expensive. You know, we've talked recently about the cost of repaving streets, and our city engineer gave you some numbers on that cost, for example. But concrete is even more expensive than asphalt, and it's also very expensive to design those. So just the design of a new intersection can be 6 figures, for example. Then there's the utility upgrade. So this project would upgrade the stormwater system, the water pipes on site and partially off site. And that's a significant investment. Now, the city wouldn't necessarily always make that investment, but to the extent we have, for example, water pipes or wastewater systems in the right of way, sometimes we fund those, right? We have a stormwater fund, stormwater master plan, and there's ways that the city's been funding those projects kind of incrementally throughout the city. But as you've heard through the budget process, a lot of those capital projects remain an unfunded item. And so developers are required to pay for all the costs of improvements for infrastructure to serve their project. And in doing so, they make improvements, to pipes that are, for example, on city streets that then benefit the project. Mm-hmm. But I can't quantify exactly how much the city would save, other than to say there is a savings because the developer is installing all of that. And they are installing a lot of improvements in the city. So the sidewalks, those are city, and crosswalks are in the city.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Williams.
He's there.
Okay. I just see he's muted. So my question is just around the maintenance of the property. I have some concerns around the property. I've lived in San Bruno for about 7-8 years now. And the property, in particular on the Welch side, has really never been aesthetically pleasing. There's always been weeds, windows have been broken with plywood for months on end, garbage just laying around. And so I guess my concern is that assuming that this project would get approved tonight, if that happens, what is the city to do to ensure that not only that the property is cleaned up, because I don't feel the city should have to use its code enforcement resources to force a cleanup, but how are we going to ensure that it's actually maintained as a construction site throughout the phasing of this property?
And Mr. Williams, you're certainly more than welcome to turn your camera on to dialogue with us. But just once you're concluded, then I'd ask that you just turn it back off.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Council Member Mason. We don't yet own the Welsh portion. We're in contract for that, but we haven't closed escrow on it yet. So that southeast corner is not yet ours. But for the rest of the project, we plan to have it, professionally managed once it's built, and we're going to use a professional GC for the construction, of course. And Justin, if you want to jump in and add to that.
Yeah, sure. Just to clarify, so I think there's two questions there. There's one question about the construction phase and keeping that clean, and then the second one is about management after the building's built. Is that correct?
No, the management after the building's built, I'm imagining you're going to have a management company. But I think for right now, I mean, this is here tonight, and can somebody clean up the site next week? And that's the first question: is are we going to have to wait for that site to be cleaned up? Because while the Welch family still owns the property, that property is part of this development agreement, from my understanding. And I don't know that I think we should have to wait for a closing to have a clean site. I mean, is that too much to ask?
Well, no. I think it's something that, yeah, we would have to work with them, obviously, because they still technically own the property, as Sean said. We haven't actually closed escrow on that, but it is something we can certainly discuss with them. I don't think it's out of the question by any means. That's, that's, again, something we need to have, just right to do and work with them, obviously. So we can certainly work on that. And to answer your second question, I think it goes back to kind of just how GW Williams has been in the community for 70 years. We are your neighbor. We've been your neighbor, and it's something that we will continue to be. So we will adhere to all the proper noticing and the proper construction practices and mitigation measures throughout all of that, or throughout the whole construction phase, I should say. So that's, that is Sean kind of echoing what Sean said about, using professionals that maintain and the site clean. And obviously we enforce that too.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would love that. I love to hear that about the property. Hopefully that can get cleaned up right away. The other question I had was around A6, it's page A61. And it's the actual design, and it's it has the Mills Park parking in the front with the gray-black tower on the left side. And I want to say this question's for the developer, but feel free to jump in, Director Smith.
Councilmember, which page are you, or?
It's A6.1.
Thank you.
It's building a view along El Camino Real.
Thank you.
Okay.
It'll be helpful as well, so we can follow.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Let me know if you're there.
I'm there personally. Who would like to take that on for the council member, please?
I would prefer or toss this to Ms. Music, the architect.
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. But I will work on screen sharing the graphic for the audience.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
I have the sheet in front of me if you would like to ask your question.
Yes, thanks, Ms. Music. I wanted to ask about two parts, but we'll start with the parking lot, the Mills Park parking. I actually would have loved to see a subterranean parking garage, so I'm really sad to see that this iteration. But with that said, is there any way to make it look a little less institutional? I mean, you don't have to, I don't believe that you have to commit tonight, because I know you have to look at different coloring schemes, but is there a way to look at maybe lightening the color a little bit? It just seems to me really off-putting compared to these really light, inviting tones throughout the rest of the property.
Yeah, I think color is something we can continue to refine. I think from just architecturally speaking, there are a variety of colors on the building. And I would say that there are colors and materials kind of associated with each architectural character grouping. Mm-hmm. So where you do see the dark gray kind of vertical element on sheet A6.1, that is a residential lobby. And that character, and that color scheme, that material, that's used for all of the lobbies kind of throughout the project. And then down at the ground plane where you see the dark gray brick again, and the signage that says Mills Park parking, that is to identify the vehicular entry point. And I think it is similar on building B as well. So some of the color blocking and some of the material uses is really used for wayfinding. Can it be softened or warmed? Sure. And we can continue to refine that. I think anytime we work on a project, we do end up with, mocking up colors and materials out in the field just for the architect to evaluate along with the development team. And I'm assuming we would do the same for this, but we can continue to refine those colors.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm only one council member, but I do think it, like I said, looks almost just really institutional to me, and it just is really dark. For me, it seems a bit off-putting. But you pointed to the other building, which is the tower on the left. And I wanted to ask, like one of the comments I made to Ms. Smith was it kind of looks like a jail tower almost. Is there a way to make that more inviting? Do the windows all have to be on the same side? I don't know, it just, same thing. To me, that particular portion is just off-putting.
Well, I think there's a couple things going on in those elements. There is a solid portion, and that is in the location of the elevator, which is, solid by nature. We feel like that actually offers a good location to have project signage. So in the renderings, we are showing a blade sign, which is hard to see if you're looking straight on, but from driving down the street or walking down the street, that would be quite prominent. And then where you see the windows grouping, that would be looking at into the elevator lobbies themselves. So the windows are purposely placed, I would say. And we are trying to provide as much glass as possible in those areas so that it is inviting and it is relatively transparent for the residents that are accessing those elevator and lobby spaces. But yeah, could we maybe add another window in there? Maybe we'd have to look at that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be something worth looking into because it looks, like I said, like a kind of like someone stuck in a tower and not kind of hopeless. So that's my comments on just the really dark gray portions of the development. As far as the Whiteway section, that I guess it would be parallel to Linden. My question around that is twofold. One is, I would imagine, but just wanted to hear a commitment that if this project moves forward, there would be security provided on site that would also walk Whiteway. I know at Shelter Creek, they have security guards that are all over the property at all hours of the day.
Sean or Justin, would you like to talk about security management?
Yeah, sure, I can take that. Yeah, that's something that we would evaluate as we get into lease and get the building built and everything like that. It's something we have done security protective measures on our properties before. We are invested in keeping this site safe for residents and for the surrounding community. So it's something that we'll look into as we kind of get through the building phase.
And what do you do at your existing properties now?
Existing properties, typically there's cameras that are placed, there's gates that can get installed. Obviously, most of the properties we own actually are garden style, so it's a little different setup than this would be. But the gates, the cameras, there is patrol that has been considered before and at certain times. It really, it kind of depends on how, again, the amount of crime, how it kind of escalates and such, and kind of we play that game a little bit. We want to deter it down, and then we'll kind of work from there.
So you answered I guess you kind of answered my question. I was going to ask about cameras. So there would be cameras on Whiteway? Because you said you normally put those up on the properties. Would there be cameras on Whiteway?
Yeah, we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet, to be honest. So it's something that, we would consider, though, of course.
Okay. So I would just ask that be always considered. We have had homeless encampments. We've had people that kind of walk that space, and I think it's something that is, I know it's a concern of a lot of the residents that live there. And I think if we're looking to, if this is viewed as an improvement to the community, I think it needs to be an improvement to the quality of life as well. And so those are areas that I think need to be looked at as the project, should it move forward, goes forward. And then I do have more comments, but I'll hold the rest of them for now. Go ahead to the next person. Thank you.
Councilmember Medina.
Yes, thank you. While we're talking about Whiteway, I know there's some questions online that have some answers about the retaining wall and the lighting there. But as for the street, during construction, pavements take take a heavy load and typically get damaged. And I know I have this answer, but for those people that don't, if staff could explain the process of how the road will be evaluated and returned to an operable condition after construction's over, and how the wall would also be, if there's any damages, what the route residents and the city would have for any damages occurred during construction.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to bring Haywan Ritchie, our city engineer, into the room. Hold on.
I'm bringing her in now.
Okay. So we did some research on White Way and the construction-related requirements, and just for the audience at home, the city updated or posted a second frequently asked questions document, which is available on the city's project website. And that includes a lot more information about White Way, including questions that were submitted up until about 4 o'clock today. But Haywan Ritchie, the city's city engineer in the Public Works Department, is available to expand on the answer there and how the city Public Works Department what requirements for construction projects and the monitoring and work that they do on this project aspect.
Yes, good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council members. Councilmember Medina, thank you for that question. We do frequently deal with construction as being, engineers for the city, and I can explain the typical scenario and then a special consideration we have for White. So typically we require pre-construction pavement condition assessments to see what the condition of the pavement is prior to construction. And then post-construction, again, we require another condition assessment. And if you recall, pavement deteriorates at a certain rate, but if it turns out that after construction, due to intense truck traffic, that if the pavement deteriorates at a greater rate than would be expected just through routine use, then we would require the contractor to bring that condition back to pre-construction conditions, and that could mean repaving. White is a special consideration because it is being widened, and we do have a requirement that they actually redo the entire pavement section. So they would be repaving White after they've installed the utilities and widened and made the improvements that they needed to. They will be repaving White, and if there are construction related damages, this would go for even the city's contractor. If they have damages and that can be shown, then the contractor, or in this case the developer, would be required to make improvements within the scope of within the time frame of our city standards, which I believe is 14 days, but don't quote me on that, but it's within a certain period of time they would have to make repairs. And so, it's not sorry, I don't mean to go on too long, but it's not unusual for, the contractor to take pre-construction photos and videos to show, were these damages there before they started? And if they can show that, the contractor did cause the damage, they would have to make those repairs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have one more question about White Way.
To the chair, just a clarification, are you referring to Parcel A on White Way?
Pardon?
Are you referring to Parcel A for White Way? So the side.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, Parcel B will be incorporated as part of the building, and so this is White Way between San Bruno and Keynes. That's correct. Thank you.
Councilmember Medina.
Yes, it's not on the plans, but would there be your intention? I'm sorry, this is for the developer. Would it be the developer doing some type of treatment on that retaining wall? It probably doesn't look to the quality that a project that's absolutely brand new. It would be a pretty stark contrast. So I'm just seeing what the plans, if any, were for any type of treatment on the wall on the west side of White Way.
Mr. Chu.
Okay, yeah, I can take that. So the retaining wall doesn't sit on GW property. So therefore, technically, it's not within our purview. But I am aware that it is a concern. And I think the city has mentioned in the report, too, that they are going to be addressing it or as part of this. So that's the answer there.
Okay, Marty, you can follow it up because I didn't quite hear the answer there.
I think that would go to staff if the city's going to do something there. I don't know.
I'll take that. White Way is a city street. The wall at this point appears to be wholly on private property, owned by the various property owners on the western side of White Way. There may be a very small portion of it that is on city property, and we will undertake a survey to confirm that. There will also be a process to look at the pre-construction condition of White Way. I think what you've heard from GW Williams is that they are not the abutting property owner to the wall, and they do not have any plans to make any improvements to the wall as a part of the Mills Park development project.
Thank you for that clarification.
I don't see any hands up right now. I wanted to go back to construction concerns that have been talked about, and again, we talked about the overall aesthetics of the facilities now. And I understand that GW Williams has maintained theirs. I understand that they don't own the one property from the Welsh. If this were to be approved, I think one of my concerns would be as those leases become up and more of the properties become vacant, if it were to approve and go forward after a period of time, just as far as graffiti, vandalism, debris, vegetation, I think that's another one of my concerns is just obviously when things sit, things happen. And so what the plans are there, and if it does get approved on construction, and I know this is further down, but that there's obviously, because I know this was a concern, one of the residents, is there some rodent pest control that gets called out that monitors that? Or is there people that we can call if we have a concern or something that we're not certain of in hours? And at what point are those things addressed and those concerns dialogued on? Staff?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members. So the city does have processes for all of those. And for example, for rodents, the contractor and property owner will usually contract with their rodent company, and there's a number that folks can call if they have issues. There's usually also a sign on the property with a contact number for noise complaints or other complaints. And then usually on a big site like this, the city building inspector, who in the Community and Economic Development Department, they're there every day. And actually, they're right down the street from City Hall. So I even drive by the site every day. And today, I'm proud to say they were out there mowing the weeds in response to us being in touch with them and cleaning up the site. And so the city keeps an eye on the site, but there are generally numbers that the residents can call to get assistance when they need it during construction. And there's an interface, there's usually a contact directly that the community can talk to.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from colleagues? No more? Or comments? Oh, yes, Councilmember Mason.
Yeah, I just I wrote a statement, but I don't know if you have questions, Mayor. Once questions are done.
I have a statement as well.
Okay.
Councilmember Davis, I take it you're good. You can just nod. Okay, so we don't have to go back. Councilmember Medina, any more questions? You're muted. Oh, there you go.
Great. Saw that. No questions at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, you know what? I'm sorry. I apologize. Because I think we covered this a little bit last time, and the idea is what's a theoretical schedule, and in that schedule, how do the payments, and it's in the development agreement, but just for clarity, how do the payments work out in parallel with the schedule, the theoretical schedule that this project will have?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. In addition, just to the timeline of if things were approved, what are we realistically looking at? Yes.
Sure. Members of the City Council, we have a theoretical schedule that we will share. I think we all know that there could be changes in the development horizon, but this is what we know today. Darcy.
Yeah, I'll take this. Okay, so if the project were to be approved, the building permits would be submitted in 2021 because it takes some time to prepare those building permits. And the condominium use permit process would also be in 2020 and 2021. And then the building permits would be approved in third quarter 2021, according to the schedule. And the payment of the community benefit payments under the development agreement are triggered at the issuance of a grading permit, which is usually the first permit to be issued in a sequencing of permits. And that sometimes comes, right when those building permits are getting ready for approval. So it's possible, I would say, in mid-2021, the first grading permit is issued for building A. And then that would start construction, and they would need the building B site for some staging, and so they wouldn't be built at the same time. But you can see here that building A would take roughly 2 years to build. It's actually that would be the entire project, and then they would start moving all the people in late 2024 and be done in early 2025. And then building B would follow by about a year, because again, they would need that site to stage and they need to do the infrastructure work. And so the building B building permit would be anticipated to be issued in the middle or latter part of 2022. And the payments are again tied to the issuance of the grading permits, the main payments. But as I mentioned in my presentation, there's two $100,000 payments for various uses, the bicycle and pedestrian improvements and the parking enforcement, and those would be paid faster. Those would be paid within 30 days of the final project approvals, and the project approvals, that date is defined in the development agreement, but that would be an upfront payment that I would anticipate could be paid out this year.
And Marty, if it's okay, and the monies that are allocated to the 200,000s, obviously that will be set aside and used solely and only for those intended, correct?
That's correct. So those are earmarked for certain purposes in the development agreement, and then the other funds, the council would make decisions about how to commit those funds when the monies are paid. So this current council would, or at this point in time, no decisions will be made about earmarking those funds. Are there any other questions about the schedule?
Okay. Sounds like not. If you could take that slide down, if you don't mind. Thank you. You can see everybody. Any other questions from colleagues? And I'm sorry, Councilmember Mason.
Yeah, thank you. This is for the developer. I guess, last year, one of the comments that were raised by various residents is that, the Whole Foods wasn't a reality. And I think it's important to confirm that Whole Foods was a reality. They were going to be in San Bruno, and I do feel that even with the potential traffic impacts, I think that there was a loss to the community. So my question to the developers is, this year, have you already been speaking to anybody to fill that space? And if you have, if you can talk about it, and if you haven't, I'd just like to know what your vision is for that space. Because the development agreement, the new development agreement, no longer requires a high-end grocer. It's broader than that.
Yeah, so I guess quickly to answer, we have not talked to anybody about that space at this point in time. And I think we, purposely put the parking at a higher ratio in order to cast a wider net of potential tenants. So that, that we didn't eliminate part of that group of being a, primarily a cafe, things like that. That's probably ideally kind of where we would head, but but we, again, wanted to kind of cast a wide net. So that's why we also upped the parking to accommodate them and whoever else. But it's going to be very market dependent, of course, as well as kind of who's, agreeable to be in that space and can make use of it and obviously benefit the city and the residents.
Can I follow up on that real quick? What do you normally find that comes in or is successful in other developments or projects that you work with, or what's average, normal? Just give us a thought on that.
You mean as far as type of tenant?
Yes.
Yeah, I think you see typically with buildings like this and these spaces that are under 10,000 square feet, you do typically see kind of the cafe or the coffee shops, things like that, that go into the space, food service. That's usually the most viable, especially for a transit-oriented type of area.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sorry, Linda, I jumped in there.
And then my question would be for probably the city attorney or the city manager, just for purposes of the record and the public. What are we voting on tonight, and what are the next steps after tonight?
So there are a variety of items in your packet. They're in order of first adopting a CEQA conformity determination. You're going to be introducing, if you do, introducing an ordinance amending the Title 12 of the Municipal Code to change the zoning map to planned development so it conforms. You're going to be adopting a variety of resolutions having to do with the vesting tentative map. And then finally, you're going to be introducing an ordinance regarding the development agreement. And the two ordinance actions tonight would be for introduction, and then those would come back at the next regular meeting for adoption. And then that would constitute, at least at this point, your final action on the project.
And that regular meeting is July 14th. For the two to come back.
So, for purposes, again, of just making sure that the public is clear, a vote of approval tonight would move the project forward, but would still require approval at the July meeting? Or
it would require adoption of the two necessary ordinances for the project at the July 14th meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Good question. If there's no further questions at this time, is there any final comments from council?
Sure. Mr. Mayor,
I'm sorry. Yes, City Manager.
Item on tonight's agenda, and I'll let the city attorney talk about that one.
Sorry, I apologize. So after all of the actions that I just mentioned, I forgot. There's sort of an out of order, normally out of normal order, consent item. And that is just adopting a resolution extending two of the deadlines in the development impact fee resolution. And you might remember that was a resolution that the city council adopted and it exempted certain pipeline projects. There were a variety of them, and this is one of those projects. And if the project were to be approved tonight, then one of the other necessary actions would be to adopt that resolution so that would pave the way for the city obtaining community benefits that are part of the development agreement.
And that's 5 consent item A is what he's referencing on the agenda. Thank you, City Attorney, for clarifying that, because there is an additional action. There would be 6 action items under the public hearing and 1 under consent if council chooses to take action. Any other questions? Councilmember Mason.
Well, I mean, if we're going to vote, I have a statement before we vote. I don't know if I should. Okay. So you're going to have to stick with me because I had to really think this through. So here we are now with the revised application. A community has really been divided over this particular project. I have done what I promised to do, which was weigh the application, residents' comments with our legal liability. I went as far as to request additional advice from 2 different outside counsel firms who represent the city to ensure consistency in the application of the current law. The reality is that a bigger, denser, SB 35 project is a possibility. Further, I want to reiterate out of fairness to what Mr. Stein said earlier, which was that Measure N was largely funded by 3 families in San Bruno. All 3 own property, and all 3 properties were designated 5 stories in the Measure N campaign. Mr. Steins is not wrong, and it's up to the public to do what they will or come to whatever conclusion they would like to with that information. But it is also worth noting that those who did not contribute as much appear to have buildings that are 3 and 4 stories in the Measure N ballot, and that the Mills Park development, as big as it is, was not included in the advertisements that went to the residents when Measure N was advertised and voted on. This is not a NIMBY community, a not in my backyard community, and the brush that has been painted on our residents is simply wrong. Residents of Mills Park have said they are okay with the development, just not a 5-story development. Further, residents were surprised to learn of the Allen development and the Bay Hill Specific Plan, both large developments taking up 3 of the 4 sides of Mills Park. So to put this aside and label residents in San Bruno as NIMBY is simply inaccurate and it's unfair. I wish there was something I could say to alleviate those residents who do not want this development to occur, because I too wish the property was 4 stories, and maybe had the development included the community in the process and made meaningful changes based on their input, the opposition that has been had and divide it created could have been avoided. Yeah. We all know that the number 1 concern from the community from the very beginning was the height, not the aesthetics. The community has requested that the development be lowered by 1 story. That did not happen here. Instead, the fear of a taller and denser development was used to move this application forward. Simply put, the method used was wrong. That is not thoughtful, nor do I believe it was necessary. However, the height was not the reason provided for not approving the project. The issues that were addressed by a fellow council member a year ago were the removal of the grocery store that would minimize traffic and requested contributions towards city initiatives. These all predated me, and as was quoted in the paper today, the developer has made valid attempts to address those issues. The grocery store is gone. For the record, I do not believe the developer has alleviated the concerns of the residents, which was that it was too high. Most know that my concerns was that the 5 stories, not the grocery store, directly across the street from single-family homes, is not necessarily within the character of the community. That combined with Measure N and how it was advertised without pictures of Mills Park, one can understand how our community is upset about this project. One can understand why residents feel like Measure N was misrepresented. Our community is not one of NIMBYs as we've been painted. We are a community that understands the need to grow, but want to maintain the character of our community. With that said, the benefits to this project at this time is a $10 million contribution to our general fund. As a reminder to the public, we have an $8 million deficit. Union labor is being used in a community that is full of working class families. The project and its residents are likely to use CityNet cable, currently also in debt, and will be a step closer to meeting our RHNA requirements. The reality we face today is that this project is needed to meet our regional housing allocation known as RHNA. We are significantly behind with a balance of 978 units out of 1,155 units still needing to be built. As a reminder, we've only built 15% of our required allotment, and not meeting those allotments could result in fees to a city that is already fiscally challenged. For those who do not know, we will receive a new allocation in the near future of more housing that will be required to be built in addition to the current allotment. I do wish that this development provided more variations in the income of tenants, an area where this honestly falls short. However, the communications process that was of concern has already been improved just since December, even with COVID, with clearer noticing, dedicated websites, and broader populations being noticed. And I will continue to advocate for a robust process for the beginning of an application and not so late in the process as was done here. Lastly, the shops downtown, many owners who have advocated for the project because of a need for more walking traffic. We want to and need to revitalize our downtown, but we cannot do so without people shopping down there and investing in our community. We need to realize that San Bruno is at a crossing point in its history, and I believe that this project is significantly better than a higher, denser project that is threatened with SB 35. I believe San Bruno is ready for change and hope that the developer owner will be more considerate throughout the building process with the Mills Park community than they have up till this vote. It is time San Bruno moves forward. I hope the developer heard me tonight and will work with the city and community in alleviating construction concerns throughout this construction period and really hear the community, then take action to alleviate these concerns they may have as the project moves forward. With that said, it is time we move forward and pave a path for San Bruno where we are fiscally solvent, building for the families, individuals, and workforce that are coming and are already here, and provide a message to investors that San Bruno is open to change and is worth investing in because we are an amazing community that deserves investment. Being a working class community is something to be proud of and not a community to be looked over. I want to repeat that because it has been lost on so many. San Bruno is a community that deserves investment. We deserve better than a property ridden with garbage and weeds with glass that has been covered with plywood for years. Many have asked me, why do other cities have nice libraries? They have nice parks, and why can't we? Development is one of many revenue sources that provides those resources and amenities that we want here in San Bruno and that other cities already have. It is important to note that San Bruno, all of us are worthy of investment. For the reasons above, I will be supporting tonight's revised application and encourage our community to begin the process of reimagining our city with a heart and what we envision if San Bruno could realize its full potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Mason, very much. Any other closing comments? Councilmember Davis said she was fine. I'm sorry. Let's go.
I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to finalize my comments. Thank you so much. I first want to start and say that no project should ever be rubber stamped. But I have to say that as a council member, I fear the future. I fear the fact that we won't have that decision. That Senate Bill 50, SB 35, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, will take those decisions right out of our hands. If you haven't heard it in the news in the past year or 2 years, we are in a housing crisis, and the state wants to change that. The state wants to make those decisions out of the council members and bring in housing much more denser and less parking. That's what I fear without our approval of this project. And I don't change my stance from July 9th of last year to tonight. I had a fear that night. I had a fear that without the approval of that project, we would be facing a much denser and less available parking. And that is scary because I don't want to live next to that. And there's no way I can support that. But we simply don't have the control to do that. 10 years ago, the council today had way more decisions. 10 years forward, I don't know that we'll have decisions. I think that what's happening and what you'll see in the state is that they will allow the state to make those decisions. This is what you can allow in transit corridor. And, you know, the thing that bothered me last year when we denied, or I actually said we didn't deny the project, we simply didn't support it going forward, so it's sort of stagnant, that we wrote a letter to Senator Wiener just a month prior that says, Senator Wiener, we have a transit corridor plan. Let the cities with plans move forward with their projects and let those plans dictate what the developers can do. And yet we didn't do that. So a month prior, we sent a letter to Senator Wiener saying that we have a transit corridor plan. It's been approved by the voters. It takes years to develop that. Over 10 years to develop that plan, and yet we want to say no to it. So how does a developer come into our community and they check all the boxes, all the city requirements, all the state and federal requirements, and we say no? To me, that leaves us in a legal liability. And I cannot do that to our city. I cannot continue to support decisions that put our city into a liability. This decision has weighed heavy on my heart. I have friends, I have close friends who either support it or don't support it. Over the last year, I have had many friends who've come to me and said, why didn't you tell me about the meeting? This is a beautiful project and the best thing for San Bruno. It is done with a specific design. It has taken into the consideration of the feedback of the community. And I will say the first project that came forward at the very first meeting is nothing like it is today. And the developer did listen to the community. There are many changes. In fact, the back side that faces Linden has a number of changes that were included. Sadly, we have a housing crisis. Sadly, I worry on a regular basis how my own family, my own kids, will afford to live in San Bruno. I worry about those who are not in homes today. Every family who lives in San Bruno who doesn't own a home worries about the next rent increase. Will they be able to afford here? I know, and as all council members know, we live in a community full of mostly trades. We live with their electricians, to carpenters, to contractors, to plasters, plumbers, you name it. And those trades do not allow us to afford $2 million homes. But what happens? Clear, simple economics. I learned this in college, supply and demand. When the supply is low, the price of the things go up. I remember the night of July 9th, there was a 3% availability of housing in San Bruno. I looked just the other day on an apartment in San Bruno selling for $900,000, and I was shocked. How does somebody afford to buy a home in San Bruno when they're selling apartments for condos for $900,000? We as a city have a right to do our. We know that the facts aren't always great, and we know that we will always have residents who are in favor of us and who are against us. And these are hard decisions to make, but I feel that this project that's been brought forward to the San Bruno is a beautiful project and will be a great addition to San Bruno and its community. And I know that the parking and not being included in a parking permit program is probably the biggest win that we've had, because I feel that I don't want to see another Shelter Creek neighborhood where residents who live in that neighborhood can't park in front of their home because the overflowing residents who live in those apartment complexes live in that neighborhood. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Davis. Councilmember Medina? 2 Medinas left.
Yes, thank you. Yes, this was a very divisive project, and even though 67.2, is that the right number? Were in favor of Measure N. This project was never even included in the Transit Corridor Plan. The Transit Corridor Plan had 3 catalytic projects. One was a commercial building by the Caltrain station, and the 2 other ones, I think, had a maximum of 55 units. The Measure N campaign focused on a new, beautiful downtown. There was no mention of a project 8 times the size of the printed material in the Transit Corridor Plan. So I bet you if the nice picture of this project was included as part of the Measure N ballot measure, it would be a different result. But we can't change history. People need to be more involved and understand what they're voting for. Their choices are at the ballot. And if somebody wants to put something on the ballot, there's a process. And in these choices, if it was my choice, it wouldn't be so high. But I don't control that. Measure N allows it. There's no legal basis for the height. It's allowed. I had concerns about the impact of this project to our community, especially those that live close to it, especially to those that drive through the community, and the concerns of the traffic. About a year ago, I said I wanted to get to yes, with the interest of a development more mindful of the neighborhood. If it was my choice, there would be shuttle funding, there would be more safety improvements, but I don't get to make that. I don't get to make that choice. I get to decide on a project that is provided to me after staff has spent a lot of time, and I do appreciate all that time, in negotiating with the developer that has now provided a revised application. a revised application that increases the guaranteed money from 5 million to 10 million. And we are aware, as Councilmember Mason just mentioned, we have financial difficulty. We have an $8.2 million deficit this year going into our budget. Clearly, yes, the positives in development are amazing financially. But I don't live next to that project. And if I did, I have to listen to it. And what can we do to reduce the impact to those residents? So, I am sorry for those residents that are there. Your home is different now. You have a different future there. It's great for housing for new people. It's wonderful, but housing for our current residents, I have to fight for that. There was and that was last year at 2 o'clock in the morning, asking for a continuance after hours of testimony or public comment. And at that point, the developer said no. Not to get a continuance, not to talk about it anymore. If we could have worked something out, maybe not. But the council decides on projects that are provided to them, and I have to make my decision with this project. So those are my comments. I appreciate labor coming out. It will be an amazing project when you can get a labor agreement. And so congratulations on that.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Medina. I want to thank all three of my colleagues for your comments, heartfelt, meaningful, and I think I'll hit a chord across our community. I also on July 9th did support the project, and I think it is a fair statement to say that was then, this is now. Grocery store, that was then. And I think we do need to look forward, move forward. And it did have a ripple effect to council members, the mayor. It had a ripple effect to the neighborhood and the community. I've always said it's not fair and it's not right for leaders, elected leaders, who try to make the best decision possible to be labeled, to be chastised. As I said that night on July 9th, when somebody made a comment to Councilmember Medina, and I said, he has every right to make the decision that he thinks is best. That's why I was put there. And that's what each one of us, I believe, in our best efforts, we do. You know, there is the communication, I would concur, is much better this time, whether it's the distance, whether it's the Q&As, whether it's the other elements that have been done. And I think still going forward in any future development project, we can still improve and solidify a true process that exists. So we check those boxes, that we have reached out and that people are aware. The benefits for the community, there are those, of course. And those are of great value for us. However, that's not the only reason. I also agree, nowadays getting a PLA is quite unheard of in any community, but it is offered here, and it does great value for our labor, who are important because we are a working class community. On the Shelter Creek, there's a council member, former mayor and council member, who always said one of the things, and keep in mind how long ago that project was developed, that said one of the things is you can't gain parking. And I always regret that we approved it without parking, which I was proud of us, that we said, hey, we need to up it. We can't have a studio at 0.75 parking, because how do you divide the car? So we changed that to increase the parking, and this project has done that. And I think that is important that we've done. I think all of us, you know, I know some folks are upset about Measure N, and for a person, myself, who had to be recused and could not participate, could not vote because I would be affected directly. So it's not near me, but development could be at some point soon. On the shuttle, I think it is important, as was asked. And those allocations from Community.org, Transportation Authority, those are things that if this goes forward, we should look for. And that is more promising because of the growth that would be there would validate that. I think also the major concern I have too is just, which Councilmember Mason had begun on that, is, the aesthetics, right? And keeping things to a standard. But I also worry about if this project goes forward when things get vacant. The commitment from GW Williams that it will be maintained, it will be kept up, and it will not become a vacant eyesore if things move forward. So the one thing I will say in this community is that I don't think anyone has disputed its aesthetics or its design. That it's not, as some of these complexes you see, they're just like a cigar or a straight up box, that it has done setbacks and other elements that I think offer something that is attractive. And I haven't really heard throughout the process anybody saying it just doesn't look good. It's about the height. It's about the density. It's about that coming so close to a neighborhood. And I don't blame anyone for feeling that the unknown is scary, and God knows we're in some unknown times. But also, as made clear too, when it came forward for the revision this time, and it was, will you have this way or you have that way? And that way would be SB 35. I think some members of the community, and I can understand why, took that as, you don't do it this way, you're going to get that way. And I don't think that always registers well either. Because one thing I do know about our community is that when they feel that we can't stand up and fight back, whether it's a PG&E or whatever it is, I think this community has made it very clear, don't underestimate us, ever. So with those things said, I really truly want to thank my colleagues for your thoughtful questions and for your comments. And as I've always said, there's nothing and no one can ever tell me different, that each one of you, and including the Vice Mayor, do not have passion, love, and dedication for this community. And it keeps us all up at night at times, and I know that. So thank you. And it has been hard because I've gotten my commentaries and phone calls and emails on both sides back then and now. So with that said, I will be quiet and I will go back to the agenda and see if there's action that is wished to be taken by the council. There are 6 items. I would take them in order of, and each of them does have to have a roll call. Each of them will need a motion and a second. So the first item is to adopt a CEQA conformity determination as part of each of the following actions.
The chair.
And then City Attorney, you can always stop me if I'm going off track here. Councilmember Davis.
So I just want to validate there's nobody else's comments or questions. We're done. So I will motion to approve the CEQA conformity determination as part of the following. Adopt the CEQA conformity.
There's a motion to adopt the CEQA. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay. There's been a motion and seconded. Davis Mason, a roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina? You're muted.
You're muted.
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next item is waive the first reading and introduce an ordinance. I would need a motion and a second to waive the first reading.
So motion to waive the first reading of the ordinance for the San Bruno Municipal Code, changing the zoning map.
Yeah, just the first, waive the first reading at this time. Is there a second to waive the first reading?
Second.
Thank you. Davis and Mason to waive the first reading. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina,
Aye.
Mayor Medina.
Aye. Next is to introduce the ordinance. Need a motion and a second?
Motion to introduce the ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
Davis Medina.
Or it just really adopt a resolution approving the plan development.
Mayor Medina, if I understand right, you took a motion to waive the first reading, but this motion, you are intending it to be for introduce an ordinance amending section 12.96.020 of Title 12 and
Yes.
onward in that bullet? Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. So it was motion from David, seconded from Councilmember Marty Medina. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason? Aye. Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye. Next item is adopt a resolution approving a plan development permit and architectural review permit. Any action from council?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion to adopt the resolution.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now with this, I can't see you all, but I got the voices down. So motion made by Davis, seconded by Medina, Marty Medina. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason? Aye. Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Next is action on adopt a resolution approving a phase vesting tentative tract subdivision, etc. Any action?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Davis, Mason, motion and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason? Aye. Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion
Next.
carries.
Thank you. Next is adopt a resolution authorizing installation of loading zone spaces around the perimeter of the site.
Motion to approve.
Change to that.
Oh, just to clarify, there's the amended resolution that was distributed with Exhibit A shown on the slide 14.
All right. Let's pause there then. If it, okay with the motioner, I just want it very clear to the colleagues of mine, and I want it clear to the community that's watching exactly. Let's explain that before we take action.
Yes. So the amended resolution just clarified the final recommendation of the TSPC committee, and it included Exhibit A, which was a detailed table shown on slide 14, which provided each of the different loading zones and their location and days and hours of operation.
Any questions from colleagues? I want to make sure everybody understood that and we're okay. Okay. Hearing and seeing no hands, then I'll go back to Councilmember Davis. I'm sorry for your motion.
A motion to approve the amended resolution.
Second.
Davis, Councilman Marty Medina, motion and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason? Aye. Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So can this be taken in one action or does it need two separate?
Yes, it can be taken in one action.
Okay, so this next bullet point is waive the first reading and introduce an ordinance approving a development agreement and affordable housing plan.
And Mayor, to clarify, that incorporates the modified text to section 5.1.2.1 roadway improvements and section 2.1.1 effective date shown on slides 40 and 41 to you tonight.
I appreciate that clarification. Are there any questions from my colleagues on that clarification before we proceed? Seeing none, then ready for action?
Motion to approve.
Second. Motion made and seconded.
I'm sorry, who made the second? Who made the second? I'm sorry.
We're going to give it, I heard Councilmember Mason come in, so let's go to Councilmember Mason.
Okay, and Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason? Aye. Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. We take the screen down, or the slide. Now we're going to move on to item 5 under consent. Adopt a resolution extending the 2-day deadlines for a development project to qualify for the exempt from the payment of development impact fees. Director Smith.
So this is a consent calendar item, and the purpose of this item is to adopt this resolution that will extend the 2 deadlines for a development project to qualify for an exemption from the city's development impact fees. This extension would be a necessary condition for the city to approve the development agreement for the Mills Park property, and that will return to you on July 14th for adoption of the ordinance as it was just introduced. You might recall that the city made previously had adopted a resolution back in February 2019 that was similar and that made this accommodation for projects that were in the pipeline when the development impact fee was approved. And the city council had previously made that policy decision, which is commonly made by councils when they look at these new fees that allow developers to enter into a development agreement or other negotiated contract with the city. As of the date of this report, we've had no other applicants for development project in the pipeline that requested it, but we did have a contract with the developer of 500 Sylvan that provided some relief. So this is not, again, atypical. And this would just make changes to the dates. The fees would remain the same, but the dates would change slightly to allow for the Mills Park Center project to move forward with the development agreement. There were no other projects that would have been captured in that. It really has been a period of time, but there are no other projects, so we're only requesting that you consider this in conjunction with the Mills Park Center project, and it would just be necessary to move that project forward. So that and note the counterbalance. Yeah, and the counterbalance in the development agreement is the $10 million community benefit payment and also the $200,000 additional payments. And that concludes my staff report, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Yes, I want to see if my colleagues have questions or need it better defined for yourselves or for others. Anything, Councilmember Davis? No? Councilmember Mason?
I guess I would just ask Director Smith if the benefit to the $10 million is really that. Can you just explain if it wasn't going in the general fund where it would traditionally go, or maybe it would be the city manager, but the benefit to the way that this particular development agreement is what was worked out?
Yeah. So the benefit, especially in light of the city's current fiscal sustainability position, is that the city has more flexibility with the $10 million general fund payment. It's unrestricted. The city, as I mentioned previously, the city council, when those funds are paid, will have the discretion to make decisions as to how to spend that. And having just gone through the budget process, you know, there are many competing priorities, and it is your jurisdiction to make those decisions. But with the development impact fees, they are allocated to very specific items, and it can only be capital infrastructure and facilities. And there are different categories such as parks and transportation and other items, but the funding is very discrete and it is restricted monies. So obviously all development projects moving forward will pay those development impact fees we've collected. We had a tiny amount, about 100,000 to date, mainly paid for by accessory dwelling units. So it's just important to reiterate that no big development project has paid those, and this alternative of entering into a negotiated contract or development impact fee development agreement is, you know, we're really just with this project closing out that option, but moving forward, all projects would be required to pay it. So there's no other projects that fall into this capture date.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I mentioned that the $10 million exceeds significantly the development impact fee calculation for the March 2020 submittal revision for the Mills Park Plaza. The development impact fee was estimated approximately $6 million.
You got cut off. Can you say that one more time?
Development impact fee estimate for the Mills Park Plaza March 2020 submittal of revisions was approximately $6.6 million.
And okay.
It's approximately $22,000 per new unit.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything, Councilmember Medina? Okay, thank you. Okay, so the action is to adopt a resolution extending the 2 deadlines for the development project. Is there a motion and second or action from the council?
Motion to approve.
There's a second.
I'll second.
There's been Davis, Mason, motion and seconded. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Davis?
Aye.
Councilmember Mason?
Aye.
Councilmember Medina?
Aye.
Mayor Medina?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, as was already indicated, July 14th is the next coming back to the City Council to be reviewed again for final approval. With that said, I want to thank staff and the applicant for their work and for being here this evening. I want to thank my colleagues for your everybody got their binders. I know the 600 pages and, did studying and it's been on our minds. And so I want to thank you with all sincerity. And we're going to be watching. And we will see you all at the next regular scheduled City Council meeting, which will be held on July 14th. And a meeting adjourned. Have a good evening. And if I don't talk to you guys, because we have no Zoom tomorrow, have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Good night.